Hello. Hello. It's your boy and guest. This is
Hello.
guest. I hope
Hi, I'm guest.
This is guest. We have guests today. Everybody say hello to guest and only ever refer to guest in the honorific of guest. Pronouns are guest self. I couldn't do. Wait, what would be like a possessive guest? Guests?
Yes. But like, yeah, with an apostrophe S.
Yes. Either way, regardless.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Endeavorance. It is Wednesday, May 15th. I glanced at my calendar. I had to glance at my calendar, and also a year, but it is Worldbuilding Wednesday, and we have our first ever guest, Lemon Emmy. Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled. I am so excited right now.
I'm so excited to be here.
I'm gonna hand the mic over to you. I guess you have your own mic. I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to you in just a second to do all the good introduction stuff.
Sounds good.
But for context, for those who have been here in my stream before, I have talked several times now about PAX East and a person that I ran into, and we just kind of like ended up having a like 2-hour long conversation about world building while a whole group of people went to go get burgers somewhere. We were ostensibly there, ostensibly getting
basically food. Sitting with them.
Cosmically, somewhere completely different. So, Em, go ahead and tell the people about you.
Hello. Hi, I'm Lemon or Em or Emily. Any variation of that is totally fine. Most commonly, you'll see me online as Lemon. I make silly TTRPG content on TikTok, and sometimes I do give actual bona fide advice, specifically about Monster of the Week, usually, because that's my primary system. But as Dev said, we met in a CVS question mark.
It was like we left from the con floor, and there was like a big amorphous group that was hungry.
Yeah.
And we were like, how do we solve this problem? Here's a bunch of nerds. How do we solve the problem of stop be hungry? And in true like a bunch of confused content creator nerd fashion, we all looked around at each other like looking for someone to give any notion of an answer, and none of us had the answer until finally somebody was like, fuck it, let's get burgers. So we start making our way to Shake Shack, the Boston's premier Shake Shack location. I have no idea if that's true or not. But
I think I had Shake Shack 3 times that weekend.
Hello.
The wildest part is that like Shake Shack is also a thing that I had to have multiple times. I was subjected to multiple times.
Yeah, forced into the Shake Shack.
Yeah. At PAX Unplugged, I had a bunch of Shake Shack as well. So it was just like, anyway. Yeah, we are like making our way downtown, so to speak, and we stopped through a CVS for reasons that I don't remember. Somebody needed something. Here's me and Emmy just sitting in like the entryway to this CVS. So everyone, and I'm like info dumping about right now Worldbuilding and like all the stuff I'm excited about right now with like what I'm building. And Emmy's like, me too, and starts just like doing the exact same, and we're just cross info dumping at each other.
It was
and
great.
So this was fated. It was fated for you to be here today.
Truly a collision of minds that was destined to happen. I like offhandedly mentioned that I had you asked me like what I was doing, and I was like, oh, like this, like a podcast like prologue thing, and I was like, I've been thinking of doing like maybe a mini series on TikTok where I talk to people about world building, about their like unique styles of world building and like what their preferred style of world building is. And you were like, do you like world building? And you were like talked about the Atlas Loop and stuff like that, and it was like, okay, so we're just gonna talk about this for the rest of the night.
Yep. And so it was, and it was great.
And here we are.
As we were talking, Sky just gifted 10 subs to the community. Thank you so very much. If you are a new viewer, especially, and you just received a subscription from Sky, be sure to thank and enjoy your fun new emotes.
Oh my god, what if the person who got it gifted is my mom?
Oh, perfect!
Who's in chat?
Excellent. This is
I
that
love
is the best possible outcome.
Hello.
Thank you for gifting a sub to my mom, Sky.
We are here on this stream. No parents of any guest will ever have to watch ads. That is the law, and I stick to it.
Appreciate
so welcome in, Mama Lemon. Okay. We've got. So here's the thing. Does Lemon have a Twitch? Yes, and it is linked in the title. If you're on desktop, I believe you can just like click on her name in the title. Otherwise, it's also on stream right there, and it's Lemon. Go follow, like absolutely. Can I? Okay, perfect. You're already following. Wonderful. Earlier today, Emmy and I hopped on a call to get ready and like just make sure that we're aligned on what we're doing and everything. And we kept veering into conversations that I was like, we should really save this for the stream. So we've clearly got a lot to cover here. And I want to start at the start, which is to say, I would love if you could give just sort of a quick rundown of like how you started doing all of this. What got you into world building? What drew you into it? What was the start of your world building adventure like?
So we talked a little bit about like how I got into TTRPGs as a whole when we were chatting. And my first ever role-playing game was actually Vampire the Masquerade, combining my systems immediately. Monster the Masquerade, got it. Monster the Masquerade. That would be sick.
That'd be really
cool. Monster Politics. And then, but like, forever I've been in like creative writing and stuff like that. I did creative writing classes all throughout college. Like I'm an English degree holder, and like I've been doing it my whole life. So like getting into tabletop role-playing games, it felt like immediately I was like, oh, I love playing, but I would love to like write the stories. Like I wanna be the maker of worlds here. Like so that kind of, I went from Vampire the Masquerade like very quickly into D&D 5e. And God, how long have I been playing? It's been like 10 years maybe or something along those lines. And so immediately I was like, I want to be the one writing the campaigns. I want to run something for my friends. I'm gonna homebrew an entire world right off the bat.
As you do.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
I want
yeah.
to accomplish this thing, I must first build an entire universe. I must recreate everything from scratch.
The thing is, I was
I'm
like,
saying this because I'm calling myself out too. Let's be
yeah.
clear.
The thing is, like, read a book or like make it up as I go, right? So
God, so say I don't tend to do modules because
yeah,
then I'd have to learn what someone else. If I do it, then I know it. Simple as
exactly. If something doesn't make sense, like, yes, it does because I said so. Like,
the power of a god. In the palm of your
exactly. I gotta say, like, the modules that I've played, I haven't played a ton of pre-written modules, and all of them have been the Wizards of the Coast pre-written ones. I played Dragon Heist, and there was a scene in it where a goblin like steals a thing that you need, and he's running through the streets, and the module literally makes it impossible to stop that goblin because you have to be led by him to the next location. So it just like completely railroads you from doing anything that deviates from that, and I'm like, that can't be it. We can't be like telling stories like that. That can't be the truth.
This goblin's name is Railroadivus.
Literally. The most powerful goblin you've ever met in your life. Nothing can stop him.
See, if it was an immortal goblin that had like its own plot reasoning as to why it was an immortal goblin, and like it led you to the next thing because you wanted to learn its secrets, that's one thing. But
I should clarify, the way the module writes it is like, if something happens to this goblin, another goblin appears in the crowd, picks up the item off the dead goblin's body, and then continues leading you to the location the original goblin was supposed to. So I killed 2 goblins, but a 3rd goblin got us where we were supposed to go, and it's just like... So I became God instead.
Yes.
And got really ambitious and was like, I'm just gonna make a whole world. And then very quickly realized every time you make that decision, it's like, okay, and now there are a million questions I'm asking myself about this. And do I need to be asking myself all those questions? Maybe not. But I'm like, this exists because of this. So then what are these people doing? And what is the difference here? And like the town over, how did they respond to that? And it's just like, my first attempt at running a D&D campaign, I don't think it was the worst thing ever, but I definitely realized as I was going into it, like, I needed to kind of simplify on the fly what I was attempting to, like, use my world to do in the story. And so we've kind of reeled that in now, and also playing Monster of the Week more frequently currently. That allows for also a lot more of like, kind of like a contained world building where I don't feel as compelled to invent a new planet as one might.
You don't have to start with what is the molecular structure of the dirt. And
yeah, it's like, what are the rules of like gravity on this one? It's like, no, we're gonna cut that down.
9.8 meters per second squared, or are we open to alterations?
Yeah, it's just like, okay, so I made up a town in North Carolina. and that's where we're gonna go from there. So everything that happens in this world pretty much happens in this made-up town in North Carolina.
I'm not convinced that I'm pretty sure that most towns in North Carolina are made up to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a matter of being like, okay, so I have to do baseline research on exactly what type of like what the land is like in North Carolina, and that's kind of already, the world provides that to me, and then I just have to invent rules for like the magic that I'm introducing into it, because Monster of the Week has a magic system that I definitely reskinned a bunch. I've done a lot of picking apart of systems to make it fit the narrative I'm trying to tell. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. I'm a lot more, I've like narrowed the scope of my world building to realizing that like, okay, here's what I should prioritize, and then we can expand as the story gets told as need be.
Mm-hmm. And so what you just said, like the diving in head first, trying to build an entire world, realizing this is a bad idea, and then starting a little bit smaller, that is the way to do it. I think you kind of need that first blunder, right?
Yeah.
You need that. I want to make a world. I've heard of Lord of the Rings. He made a world, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, you're just
if
like,
Tolkien
oh,
can do it, how hard can it be?
How hard could it possibly be? The man made, what was it, like, he made a language and then made a world to justify the language and then wrote books to justify the world, basically. Like,
Just,
yeah.
What a crazy...
And, like, not to put Tolkien up on, like, a pedestal or whatever, but, like, you kind of need to make that mistake of, like, go way too far, realize what that means, and then reel it in, figure out what you're good at, and then go back out to expanding a bit. But
yeah,
Monster of the Week is such an interesting starting point, or an interesting place to start doing world building, because it kind of forces, as you mentioned, like you're working in like, I'm assuming your North Carolina town is your Monster of the Week stuff. It makes the most sense for that game to be played in the real world, and so you're starting with alternate reality rather than fantasy world. You're starting with like alt history or alt reality or whatever.
You're like introducing stuff into a world that is pre-established, essentially, and creating a rule set that you basically like enact. And you're like, well, in this universe, everything that we know about the world, like in real life, still is pretty true, but also monsters exist, and here's why they exist, and here's like the rules behind that.
Yeah.
And how these people, like, how do I think people in real life would respond to the fact that monsters do exist? So like in the world,
screaming and
there's
running around.
other than like complete and utter chaos, like which I think would very quickly evolve into like the monsters are due on Maple Street levels of like Twilight Zone chaos. It's like, okay, so this is our world, but monsters exist in it. So clearly there's a sect of the government that is fully dedicated to locating monsters and creating like teams of agents to respond to monster activity. So one of my players plays a class. I reskinned all the Monster of the Week classes because our story is based off of like 80s slasher horror movies.
Oh, sick.
So yeah, so all the classes have been reskinned into like stereotype characters that you would find in like horror movies. So like the professional has been reskinned into the jock, and so the jock's professional team is their team. Like, so the jock is like the coach of a local swim team, and that they're like training. There's a whole government organization that is specifically dedicated to like training the youth to become monster hunters as they grow up and work for the government. And it's like, yeah, because of course they do, because in this world you need to be like the same way the military like goes into high schools and recruits like down on their luck kids in our actual reality. Of course the government would still be predatory in that capacity, but they're doing it now so that kids want to fight monsters. Like,
that is extremely, extremely good. I love the idea. First of all, okay, like I wasn't expecting swim team. Like you left field, came out of nowhere with swim team.
Listen, it's a small town in North Carolina. What is this town
like,
obsessed with?
You would think that there'd be like a high school football team or something, but no, a swim team.
This is we're not Friday Night Lightsing this.
the local fencing emporium, you know, the local sword martial arts. I want to call out a real quick comment from Inky a little bit ago that says, quote, "A game mechanic pissed me off, so I became a god." Which is accurate, and I think a great origin story. That's a really good elevator pitch origin story for you.
I just think that's why most people become DMs, right? Is like, I couldn't control this in the way I wanted to, so I'm gonna become the person controlling it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I'm super curious as to what drew you to Monster of the Week, and if you chose Monster of the Week first or making your own world first. It sounds like you chose Monster of the Week first, or you played that first.
So I I was introduced to Monster of the Week through the Adventure Zone podcast. I listened to their Amnesty season, and that was the first time. I loved Amnesty. I was so upset that people kind of dropped that podcast because it wasn't like inherently fantasy anymore.
Yeah.
Like D&D was like the big system, and people weren't really branching out.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, well, the system's unfamiliar and it's set in a modern setting, so I'm not interested. And I was like, cryptid themed like mystery setting, give it to me now. So that was my introduction to Monster of the Week as a game system. And trying to think when I like acquired my personal copy of the actual book. I think I had the idea for my campaign kind of simultaneously getting into the idea of running a Monster of the Week campaign, because I was like, I want to do a mystery, and I just don't feel like the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons are going to play into the way. I'm a very roleplay driven person. The people that I play with. That. Yeah, crazy. The people I play with are also extremely roleplay driven, like on a regular basis. So I was like, I want a system that prioritizes roleplay, and then mechanics is like a secondary thing to create structure, right?
Yeah.
And Monster of the Week was when I was thinking about Amnesty, and I was thinking about the way that story was told, I like thought about how much more of that story felt like it was story first and a game second. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly the type of feel I wanted, because I was going for, at first I was like, I'll invent a system. And then I realized that's so difficult. Why would I do that?
Why would you do that? Why would you do that?
Wow, who would do that? Who would create their own system?
That's stupid.
I mean, I hadn't, my GMing experience was still pretty low. My original homebrew game was still the bulk of my experience. Like we just said, I wasn't really a module person, so running games that were kind of my own story was how I was navigating TTRPGs. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna use Monster of the Week because the story I want to tell, I want it to feel like you're watching a slasher movie. And the Monster of the Week components are very like, the only combat move in Monster of the Week is kick some ass. That's everyone just kicks some ass if they want to fight something. And everything else is like investigations, investigate a mystery. It's read a bad situation. Like, I wanted, the system was kind of, I knew the story I wanted to tell, and then I settled on the Monster of the Week system, and then I world built after that, because I had the idea for the story more than I had the idea for the world. But I'm infamously like a slasher summer camp enjoyer, and I was like, it's gonna be at a summer camp. So where am I putting my summer camp? That's the big question. And all of them are camp counselors. All the players are camp counselors. So like...
Okay, wait a minute. So it's Monster of the Week set in a made-up town in North Carolina where everybody is a camp counselor at it. That's so good.
All my players are camp counselors, and so like what we have out that we publish with the podcast that I do is like a prologue that is set 5 years before our main campaign that we're still producing. And the way that we did that is I asked my players, do you want to play your characters but in a kind of non-canonical scenario so you can get accustomed to your characters that you built? Or do you want me to give you characters that exist in this world and it occurs in the canon timeline, but you're not going to play your long-term characters? And they chose the latter. They wanted to play in the canon timeline as characters that I made for them. So Monster of the Week has a class called the Mundane, in which you are just a guy, which I reskinned to be called the Extra. And so it was like they played as truly extras. These are just people that also live in the town that the main story is set in. Mm-hmm. But it was set 5 years in the past to the main campaign. And the framework of the mystery that they investigated is the concept of the Blair Witch Project. And the whole idea is that like people who are familiar with the media that I draw my inspiration from can be like, oh, this is the Blair Witch Project. And then like subvert the expectation of like what the conclusion of the mystery is going to be. It's not just going to be like the end of the Blair Witch Project movie. There's going to be
an actual
mystery.
The character.
Yeah, there's going to be a monster. Like there's going to be an encounter. And so like when I'm gonna like spoil the end of the prologue a little bit, but like I kind of pull a monster house where like there's still not really a physical witch the way there isn't one in the Blair Witch Project, but her like soul has been tethered to the house that she lived in this woods for so long that her body is essentially the house. And so when they enter her home, they are now inside her like her body essentially, and she can control what happens to them inside. So like
okay, damn. All right.
So, and it's great because then I have like when we did our kind of session 0, there's a news reporter that talks and like there's a local newspaper and there's a news reporter that does like a radio broadcast every like top of the episode. And they talk about the 5-year anniversary of these disappearances in the woods, right? And like these things that happened that indicate that like something's not quite right about this small town in North Carolina, but like nobody's quite found the source or reason behind it yet. And then like you enter our main characters who are like 4 kids from all over the place who are just here to be a camp counselor at a camp, and Scooby-Doo shenanigans ensue. Like
so very, very good. I love what you just said about the radio announcer.
Yeah.
I love. So I adore any kind of situation where you can take a thing that would absolutely exist, a news broadcaster, like a radio broadcaster, talking about what's going on, and although there's no real reason for that to be like a part of the gameplay, using it as flavor and stage setting, chef's kiss. Like it's just beautiful. It's wonderful.
And it gives you that opportunity to allude to other things that are happening, because the Monster of the Week like timeline, like you have a countdown that plays out as the characters are navigating the story.
Yeah.
No, whether or not the characters are directly interacting with what's going down. So you can use it as kind of a like, this is happening while what we're watching is happening, like in the background. It's really cool.
So one of my favorite games is Blades in the Dark, and I mentioned this earlier in our chat that I wanted to not talk about it then, to save it for now.
Please talk about it now. I'm so excited.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the worlds that we're making, and like how we, like what you just said, tailoring the world to fit the story and fit the game better and fit the scenario. Blades is one of my favorite games, and when you're playing Blades, if you're not familiar, Blades in the Dark is a game where you play as a group of scoundrels. It's you do crime the game. It is, if you've ever wanted to play a TTRPG where you're pulling off heists with your friends, that's Blades in the Dark. That is to a T. The point of the game is you sit down, do a heist, end of game, come back the next week, do another heist. The way that game works is that you are a member of a gang that's in a town, or a city rather, and the city is pretty much the only place you can go. You can't really go outside city limits. In the default setting, the city is literally surrounded by a giant electric fence, essentially, made out of these huge pylons that just have bolts of lightning shooting from each other all the time, and they're powered by the blood of like titanic monsters that are found outside of the gates, like of the city limits. So it's like an endless dark void full of demonic monsters being kept at bay by massive lightning fences powered by their blood. But don't worry about that, just stay within the walls and you're fine. And so because you kind of like have to be within the city limits, it means that like everything in the city has been claimed. And so if you are a fledgling gang, you basically can't be safe anywhere, and you need to start carving out a space for yourself. And so when you're designing a world for Blades, you need to have more or less a reason why you can't go outside of the city limits, or like why you're kind of stuck. The world that I built, and I'm really sad that I don't think I have the material for this anymore. I really want to see if I can find and resurrect it, but I've lost so much writing to just like corrupt files. Anyway.
It's terrible.
It's the worst. But I made a world for Blades that I ran and would love to run again someday. That is a alt future, maybe not so alt future, but alt future post climate apocalypse, Washington D.C. And so it was essentially the world had ended, more or less. The climate apocalypse happened. The Earth's atmosphere is not really capable of stopping the sun from cooking you alive, and everything is just barren wastelands now. But an organization called Aegis created a massive deployable solar shield that can cover an entire city. And they deployed them to certain cities, and people within those cities are able to continue living.
Ooh.
Everyone outside of those shields is getting cooked alive and is dead, except for a specific type of person who is now like an altered hybrid human that can withstand being out in the sun for a short period of time, as just like an extra flavorful sort of like alternate species. So you can't leave the city limits, because if you go outside the city limits, you're going to be cooked. And basically no one has any method of contacting anyone from the outside world. You have to assume everything else is gone. In reality, there are other cities that are in the same situation and have similarly been cut off, and only the most elite people in power are able to actually communicate with each other and are aware of what places are still doing what. But the players of this campaign, as randoms, are just like the only thing that they care about is trying to establish themselves within this city limits.
Mm-hmm.
I was, again, similar to what you did with like taking a existing area and just making a made up town in there. I basically just took DC. I really wanted it to be like I wanted to reuse all the political concepts. So each of the districts in DC basically became their own like mini territory country kind of thing. But then there was also still like Capitol Hill with the White House and the Senate and Congress and whatnot. And I changed senators and Congress and the president and whatnot to like their positions in power are very different now, where you still have a leader of each of the different sort of boroughs, but senators now are essentially ninjas. They exist at their like, so the title senator is given to elite assassins that work for the government, essentially to maintain order from the highest power. So if you gain enough notoriety and threaten the status quo, a senator will be dispatched after you. And so there was always this like, you are tiny and you can start to work your way up, but everyone who's here is aware that if you ever caught wind that a senator is after you, that is, you're a dead man walking.
Yeah,
and so there's always this like struggle of how much noise do we make? How much of a impression do we make as we're carving out our territory? How do we piss off the right people? How do we take out the right people without drawing too much attention? So much fun. Having that looming threat, so very good. But
I love a city in a dome.
Yeah, city in a dome is a giant snow globe, basically.
Yeah.
And it meant that you have your inherent powers. You've got the people who control the dome, you've got the government that previously existed, and then you've got all the people trying to make a name for themselves.
Yeah.
And DC has a lot of variety. There's a national park. There are tight residential streets that are really, really old and meandery and strange, so it makes for some really great terrain and interesting stuff. But then there's also all the museums and a whole bunch of like big open areas that could be converted into other stuff. Take all the different monuments. You know, the Washington Monument can be turned into like a stronghold and a vantage point and all that stuff. So the Washington Monument, I believe, was actually where they mounted the device to create the dome. So it was on top of the Washington Monument shooting up into the sky, and it made this like big orange dome.
That's phenomenal. I love that so much. I think it's a really interesting conversation to like talk. I mean, what we've been talking about, where it's like because everyone thinks of world building, and I think it's a little bit of an intimidating concept, because when you think of world building, it almost always sounds like, okay, start from scratch. Like, what is your world? You have to build everything yourself. And like, we've both just established that 2 examples of us world building in the actual world.
Yeah.
And how that allows us to just reinvent what those pre-existing places are. Like the way that you talked about utilizing how Washington DC is set up to create an effective system in that world. I did a similar thing with the town that I made in North Carolina, because the town that I established is near like the Great Smoky Mountains, and so it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying, where they're very isolated. Yep. This town is like far away from a lot of other civilization, and I utilize that to create that feeling of like being cut off. That was definitely like heavily inspired by the way that Griffin did Amnesty, where he put them in like the national radio quiet zone. Yeah. And they're in the 80s, so the technology is not quite there yet for like a lot of long distance contact. Like barely, people obviously don't have like cell phones or anything like that really. And it helped me create that atmosphere of horror where it's like this is it, you're trapped, you are stuck in this dead end town where, first of all, everyone knows each other, so it's really hard to keep a secret here. Yeah. And there's not going to be a lot of outside help to come and help, which I think helps also like focus you in on the protagonists of your story as well. Like having these these little encapsulated worlds give that feeling of like the world is rotating around what's happening here. Yeah. Which I think is while like the real world doesn't work like that, I think in storytelling that is how the world should work, is like you as the player should feel like what I'm doing here is like the focal point of what's happening in this area, really. Like I'm contributing to the main impact that is like happening to this place. Having
agency. Like
yeah, exactly.
It sucks to be in a campaign where I get the notion of like, okay, you're supposed to start off as a nobody and work your way up and get super powerful and whatever, but that's what you have from games that are like big RPGs like D&D. But for something like Monster of the Week, it absolutely makes more sense. Like you are here to do an episodic thing and be the main cast.
Yeah.
You know, like if it started off with like you are an insignificant nobody, like, well then why am I that's me in real life. Like why am I doing that in fantasy too?
This is my escapism. What the heck?
I want to mention real quick before we get too far from it, because I forgot when I was rambling. The reason I thought of the Blades thing to begin with was you mentioned the radio and using radio to sort of like talk about the stories that are going on. I used a newspaper, like a newspaper concept, and this was an in-person, just personal at-home game, but I still, I loved doing this every time. I made a single sheet printout that had 4 or 5 like news stories that were just a headline and a simple paragraph that was given to the players every morning. They were staying in like a safe house underneath of a cafe, and the guy who owned the cafe would like bring them down their like morning coffee and like leave them the paper. And so they would see in the newspaper both the effects from their previous session being like reported on. So if there was like a big heist that had a lot of heat generated, so like they blew something up, that would be in the paper the next time they came down to play. As a way to remind them what happened. But it would also have several other plot hooks that are staring them in the face, and whichever plot hooks they don't pick to investigate advance on their own.
Yeah.
Next time. So just like you said, having a sense of the world is moving, your actions matter, but the world continues to move. There were other gangs making other plays, and so you could see if they ignored something long enough, like it would progress to a problematic point.
Yeah.
But it gave them something to hook onto and see how are we impacting the world and what's next.
It's so cool.
Storytelling.
I love that so much. Establishing things that are not necessarily like, sometimes it's like, I don't even really want you guys to be addressing this yet, but like in the back of your head, like progressing it to a point where maybe one day it's gonna collide into what they're doing is just, the payoff of that is so satisfying narratively as well. It's just, it really, and it contributes to making a world that feels like it's like living and breathing instead of stationary outside of the scene we're watching happen.
And it's amazing how little you actually have to do to do that. Like, you could have, if you wanted to try to make a living, breathing world, you could try to name every single character and give them all individual backstories and like figure out what they're doing at work and at home and whatnot, or like just mention a thing and get back to it later. And like that's from a mental load perspective about as much as anybody can handle to begin with. Like, that matters now. Wow. The power of storytelling. But in the moment, it really does feel significant.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, it's phenomenal.
We're gonna get, let's see. Cotton says, are we on to questions? Soonish. We have a couple of other things I want to talk about first. And then we will start referencing submitted questions. I've posted a link. I will post it again real quick. I don't know if anybody pinned it or not, but I will post the link one more time. If you would like to send in a question, there is a link to submit them. Simple little form. We'll get to them. Let's see here. The favorite worlds that we've built is a thing I have on here.
Oh, yeah.
I guess we've kind of done a little bit, a smidge of. But I'm curious. Yeah, we've been talking about the worlds that we're like that we've built or like you're currently working with. Is that your favorite world? Do you have a different favorite world? Even if it's just a pet project?
I think, it's interesting. I think it's my favorite world just because it feels the most fleshed out to me, although probably because I've been working on it the longest, but I will say the world that I took too big of a bite of when I started DMing, my like homebrew D&D world has like a very special place in my heart because despite it being a little ambitious, the concept as a whole kind of it made sense. It worked out in a way that was conducive to the story that we were telling. I thankfully did not try to build an entire planet's worth of world, which was a good start. I did like a continent, and it was called Althane, and it was basically a continent that at one point was kind of like a kingdom, where there was one central kind of city hub that like when you see the castle that is also partially like town, and it all builds into one kind of focal point city, and everywhere was united under this council that ruled over this entire continent as one kind of established entity. And then this cult came and summoned dark, dormant magic and caused the ground to basically split below this capital city. And the council had these champions that they sent forth to combat this cult and try and squelch this rebellion. And it went very sideways, and it fractured the kingdom into parts of the continent. And so they kind of were like, maybe having all of our resources and power concentrated in one area was not a good call. Also, letting in anybody who's not from here is scary now. So you had to get the rules were kind of like you had to get a specific type of permit to enter this continent, and the continent had been fractured into 4 different kingdoms this time, and each kingdom had a central kind of role that it contributed to the economy so that the continent itself could self-regulate. It didn't want to have to rely on outside imports or support in any capacity. So it fractured into this is Elder's Bane. It is the capital of magic in this continent. If you want to learn a school of magic in any capacity, the scholars and people who will teach you how to do that are located here. Our largest religious temples are in Elder's Bane. Our Bard colleges are here. Like,
just put it all there. Whatever.
Yeah.
Is it magic?
If you want to learn, it's over there. And then you had like Oromir, which was like, this is our agricultural center. If you're looking to farm or fish or anything like this, if you're looking to contribute to the economy in that capacity, you want like a quiet, simple life. You want to live in that portion of our continent because that's where the fields are ever expanding and there's land that you can buy and just contribute that capacity. Like, it was very like, if you go to a specific town, it has a culture of what its economy is based on. And then the way that you'd encourage travel between these is like, you'd have these traveling caravans of merchants that would visit each sector of the continent and just do trade like constantly, like a nomadic caravan of people that would trade who was involved in it, and then that way, like, that was circulating goods throughout the continent, and allowing them to have this kind of like isolationist idea of like, we don't want anybody coming in here. You can get a permit if you really need something.
Stuff.
Yeah, we don't want to like discourage people from moving here, but we need to know that you're a trustworthy person. It's kind of like getting a visa to like live in a place that's not your country, where you have to like continuously apply yourself and prove that you're worthy of being a citizen there. Yeah. It's kind of that concept. Not the best system either, but they were like, well, having one ruling body was also bad for us, so we're trying this other thing. And we're all kind of like born of generations of trauma from this horrible cataclysmic event that happened to us. So, and then there was
them for changing things, though.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, they tried something else, right? They weren't just like, let's rebuild. Part of it was because they couldn't. There was this huge stretch of land that was where this fracture had originated from, where the summoning of this dormant magic had stemmed from, and it was where that original like castle had been. And it had become overgrown magic wilds. So I kind of always compared it to like a place that has been nuked and the radiation stays in the ground for years and years and years. It's like that, but if the nuke was full of dark, twisted magic, and so it just like seeped into the ground here, and it's overgrown with these wilds that are like, their nutrients are coming from this magic. It's incredibly unpredictable. It was called the Evermore, and people would go in there and just never return. So I
have so many questions to ask about this place.
Well, like, I mean, feel free. It was that's where I set the first arc of the campaign in, and it was, I love a freaky circus, so I was like, a circus has popped up in the middle of the Evermore and is giving out flyers to people on this continent, inviting people to traverse into the Evermore and attend this circus. So my players were tasked with investigating this and figuring out, how do they get there? Who is proprieting? Why is it there? Is it dangerous? People are going to this circus, and there has been word about it. So, hey, check it. Please it out.
That is so cool. Okay. For the first thing that came to my mind is like, what does that do to the flora and fauna? Because you mentioned a nuke. The first thing that my mind goes to is Chernobyl, and I don't know if you've seen the stuff about like animals kind of animals and nature reclaiming Chernobyl, more or less, because like humans can't, but plants and animals that don't live as long and don't care as much about cancer are chilling.
Yeah.
And like they're like making their own sort of like new norms and whatnot. So I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious what's up in the Evermore.
Well, it was originally just ruins, and then, like you said, there was this reclamation of it, and also world's craziest fertilizer is this like wild magic that has imbued the the ground here, and it became very rapidly overgrown. So the flora itself is very bizarre. It's not really native flora. It's very dense and disorienting, and a lot of the Evermore was I like using illusion magic a lot in D&D to make things not appear as they seem. I love it's like introducing the Feywild, like a pocket of the Feywild on the prime material plane. And what I would do a lot is for the random encounters that they would have while traversing the Evermore is I would smush two stat blocks together and create like hybrid monsters that they would come across. And not all of them were hostile inherently, but I would like combine abilities of certain creatures, and then periodically there would be a roll on a table to see if the magic that has stayed here, it's kind of like when you build up static electricity in an area for a long period of time and it has to release in like bursts. I would do a wild roll to see if one of these bursts of magic would happen, and it would either result in an encounter with one of these creatures, or we had our poor little wizard got directly essentially hit with like a bolt of this magic, and it killed him. He had like an out-of-body experience, and then he woke up in his body again at like a stable amount of health. But this like dark marking started to progress across his body, and he had this like target point that it was expanding from in the center of his chest. And later in the story, they found out that my kind of main NPC that was heading this organization that they were working for, he had lived through the initial cataclysm, and he had been hit directly by a bolt of this magic in the fight because he was one of the chosen champions of the council, and it had killed him and then brought him back to life in the same capacity. And he's human, but he's lived for hundreds of years because the only thing that's keeping him alive is this magic that is circulating through his body. So now we have a wizard that's multi-classing into a homebrew sorcerer class that is based off of the magic of these wilds, because it essentially like it's incredibly deadly, but there's also like a necromancy reanimating aspect to it, where that was why it was so forbidden, is it would like mutilate bodies and like create life where it shouldn't be, and it would mess with stuff. So it was like a combination of a wild magic sorcerer and then also, but specifically for the type of magic that was embedded in this area. It was fun.
Love busted magic. Love busted magic and mages or wizards who are like, I'm a magic person, and they like encounter some busted ass magic, and they're like, okay, I don't know if I want to be a magic person anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It was really fun to like have this kind of unpredictability, and also this area where it felt like you couldn't just use normal survival skills to traverse. Because so they had a map that had been given to them by a young girl who worked for the circus, and it would track the location of the circus, because they would learn that because of the ever-changing layout of this forest, the circus's location would kind of move with the changing landscape. And this map had a way of tracking it, so that they would always be walking in the direction of the circus.
That's really cool. Like, it gives me big where's the oh god, what's the not the Forbidden Forest. The Woods in She-Ra. I don't know if you've watched that, but
I haven't watched She-Ra. A lot of my friends did, so I know some stuff about it, but
I'm so actually angry that I can't think of the name right now. It's like they say it in like every other sentence. It's like a main area they spend like half the show in. Name's Bond. You can't forget too. Not the Whispering Woods. No, wait. She-Ra, Whispering Woods. Yeah, Whispering Woods. Yeah. The Whispering Woods is a location that is it's in the show. It's featured very heavily, and It is essentially a big amorphous forest that is between the home base of the main bad guys and the home base of the main good guys. And the forest itself is understood to have shifting terrain inside of it. So it's like basically unpassable without trying really hard or having some way of figuring out how to navigate it.
Yeah.
And boy, howdy, do they use that trope a lot of like, we're lost. We've never been here before. We don't know where we are. Oh, look, the forest has shifted something convenient into my view. And now the plot proceeds. That I too, in my favorite world, have a forest that you can enter and cannot leave, and also starts with the word ever.
Oh my god, please talk about it. I want to hear.
It's called the Everwoods, which I kind of prefer Evermore. I like that quite a bit.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the Everwoods were just like a forest that was near an otherwise like mundane town, and essentially were a giant illusion, and they're a vestige of a broken spell that somebody was using to hide something like thousands of years ago, and it was never stopped. The person is long gone now. Whatever they were trying to hide is also long gone, but their magic is still growing and concealing. And so like if you were to sort of zoom out to the time scale of the gods and you know, fast forward a few thousand years, pretty much the entire continent would just be taken over by this forest. But the pace is so slow that it doesn't really pose a threat that way. But if you walk into it, you are immediately, you're lost. You're done. The second you cross the threshold, you turn around and it's just infinite forest behind you and in every direction. There is a way out. I won't say how in case I resurrect this world and use that again. But there have been several campaigns that I've run in this world that make their way at some point into the Everwoods, do something significant, and then eventually I just have them get teleported out somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because I haven't had anybody actually solve the puzzle yet. But there's a lot that you can do with either like a pocket dimension or, you know, something like this where you have a concentration of magic in a place that is difficult to navigate and lots of people get lost and probably die in. The things that you might find in there, like people have traveled into there, died, left their pack probably, or like we're seeking something, or we're also seeking power, or we're running away from something to hide something. It's like diving for treasure, but on land, and the only risk is that you probably are never going to be able to leave. But is that so bad? But the number of quests that you can set up that are like, this thing of value is missing. I suspect it's in this really dangerous location. Can you go get it?
Yeah.
It was ripe for that. But
That's great.
I had a quest once that was a couple that fled to the Everwoods to go on a picnic, like not really believing the stories, not believing that, you know, believing that they were like young teenagers, and they were like, oh well, we can, as long as we're together, we can handle anything. They fucking died, and the girl it was a girl and a guy, and they went into the woods. The girl had found a relic that she thought was going to be like a wonderful gift for her boyfriend, and what she didn't realize was that the relic itself is like houses essentially the soul of a god of giving, and anyone, if you were to like transfer that relic, it consumes a soul into the relic with which to then bestow elsewhere. But she didn't know that, so she goes to give it to her boyfriend and just consumes his soul and isn't capable of handling this power of a god, and ends up having that soul injected into herself. So she's now hosting two souls, becomes a monster referred to as an oversoul, and is now like haunting these woods. So you've got this like heartbreak, I killed my lover and now must carry his soul, and it causes anguish, but also I'm a monster now, so on and so forth. And all of that was made possible because now there's this just like or all of that was great because now there's this like local story of a couple of kids that went missing and the woods claimed them. If only somebody could go find them, like that's, you know, hopefully we can get them back and they'll be safe again or something. And so they just have been sending adventurers constantly, and it hasn't worked because you can't come back out.
That's so cool. I love the idea of also like creating monsters like for a setting that you like, world building and then creating things that would inhabit that world that would it like you can just it's just like an endless chain of creating things that are new, which is the best part of like running a game for me, or like building a world. It is expanding on, it's like, okay, well, this is where they live, what inhabits it and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
It's great. I am curious because I know that when I was doing like the Evermore and stuff like that, I had a lot of references to like storybook type elements because one of the things that I'm working on right now for like a one shot that I'm doing with a couple of friends is like a grimdark style thing, but a Witcher inspired grimdark.
You're saying words I like a lot.
Yeah, so I take a lot of inspiration from the media I consume, and fairy tales have always been like a part of that. So my original campaign, that circus, was based on illusion magic, and the heart of that story was inspired by the Snow Queen. So one of the things that they had as a magic item that they accrued was this piece of glass called goblin glass, and it essentially gave them true sight if they looked through it. But it kind of worked differently because in the Snow Queen, like, glass gets in this boy's eyes and everything beautiful in the world looks ugly to him, and it like breaks his heart and everything. So I created the magic item Goblin Glass, where they could true sight and see through the illusion magic of the circus, which was like, obviously it was a coven of hags running this circus.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and so all of the like fun, colorful performers were actually monsters that were being disguised to look like colorful performers, and they could see that. But there's also like an added side effect of this, where like they could see that to things that were not under the influence of illusion magic, where things that were not under an illusion would then show you kind of the opposite of how they appeared. So I had a DM PC who used a glamour charm to conceal the fact that he was a tiefling, because he grew up with a father who was trying to hide that. And so the true sight would like deactivate his glamour essentially and show like his full tiefling form to people.
Oh shit.
And he also he was a homebrew class that I had found called a Mythic Beast, where he was hosting the soul of like an eldritch deity kind of thing, or entity, not deity really, in his body. So not only did it show his full tiefling form, it showed like the shadow of this beast kind of like wrapped around him, and like he had a mark of a beast arm that like crawled up his arm as they looked at him through the goblin glass, and it would just like turn the things that you loved into like the ugliest versions of themselves, as just kind of an interpretation of that original goblin glass and how, or like those shards of glass from the Snow Queen, and turning that into a magic item that had a kind of similar effect on the user was fun. And so I'm curious to see if to know if you also have any type of media that you've used to like world build off of before, that you like, it's to you as you're building it, you're like, this is evident to me that I like rebranded this into an aspect of my world.
100,000 quadrillion %.
Yeah.
I do a lot of yoinking. I do a lot of here's a little preview of some stuff that I might be working on in the not so distant future. I specifically do that so much and have realized so many different inspirations that I've pulled from, and have thought through all the things that I've like gleaned from various points of inspiration that like I wanted to make. I've been toying with the idea of making videos about the things I take inspiration from and like what excites me about them and like how I pull inspiration from them. So we'll see if I get to that. But I mean Zelda. I mean Everwood's Zelda. I mean, come on. It's the Lost Woods. Like, I mean, it's not like Zelda came up with the idea of a forest that you get lost in or whatever, but like it is foundational to me the Zelda franchise. It taught me how to problem solve. And like my entire career up before I started doing content creation was software development, which is entirely problem solving. And I think the reason I was primed to do that job was I played so goddamn much Zelda, and I approached every situation with like, let's get a lay of the land. Let's understand what we're able to work with. Okay, let's check these things and see how they all interact. Now let's solve the puzzle and figure out where to go from where. Let's keep an idea in our head of everything that's going on, and like, oh, that thing happened. That means this is going to change. And that kind of stuff, like I love working that into world building, but for a more specific, like obvious inspiration, you've got the Lost Woods, which in Zelda is typically a see you later, Sky. I see you guys. Say you gotta go. Have a great stream. Take care. Thank you so much for the gifted subs to all the folks, and have a wonderful evening. So in Zelda, for those who are not familiar, in Zelda, the Lost Woods is a recurring location that always has some trick to navigating it. In Ocarina of Time, for example, which is, I believe, the first Lost Woods I encountered, it's a bunch of it's just a grid of rooms that have an exit north, south, east, and west. But there's a song playing, and as you approach one of the exits, the song plays a little bit louder. Like it plays a little bit more and it's a little bit fuller. And that tells you that that's the correct direction to go. If you don't figure out that trick and do that to navigate, you will go through an exit and it'll just take you back to the entrance, which is not great for progression. So the idea of a location that doesn't work the way you think it would, and this got reinforced again with another one of my favorite games, Paper Mario. So I played Paper Mario and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door on my stream, but in Paper Mario they also have a creepy woods that has a bunch of interconnected areas that each have 4 exits, and one of the 4 exits has something to look for that tells you this is the correct one to continue forward. And if you do any of the wrong ones, you go back to the start. And I mean, as a kid, that sequence legitimately scared me, because there was some creepy parts that you had to like wait for a tree to have a laughing creepy face on it, and I was like, I'm too scared because I'm like 9. But yeah, so like I think I was just primed to have some kind of creepy woods that if you navigate incorrectly, it does bad things to you. But on the whole, like again with Zelda, I have a terrible habit of making everything just be a magic crystal. Because like everything can be just explained. It's just a magic crystal. Yeah. It's a crystal, it's this color, and it's magic. Yeah. And like,
okay, Sonic.
Yeah, I do that a lot. Yeah, Sonic as well. But yeah, collect all the MacGuffin emeralds, and eventually you'll be able to have a hedgehog to human romantic relationship, I guess. But I think I just played a lot of Zelda and liked all the different items and liked I loved the go into a temple, find some MacGuffin, use the MacGuffin to navigate the rest of the temple, fight the boss, gain some major power. That loop just feels so good to me, and I just love doing it. And while I try to not just make all of my campaigns be that cookie cutter, it informed the way that I think about building stories. And yeah, I think the other piece of media that is the most, or one of the most impactful on my world building and the way that I got into it, at least, and I've done a lot of different types of worlds since then, but originally all I wanted to make were worlds that were inspired by the Avatar: The Last Airbender universe. And specifically, I've actually mentioned this before, specifically, it wasn't the 4 nations, it wasn't the magic system, it wasn't the reincarnation of the Avatar, it wasn't any of those things. It was the travel. It was the sense of journey and adventure and exploration. In that show, they do so much flying around on Appa and going from place to place. They really lean into navigating the world, and they made it feel big. They may have them flying they'll do some cold opens for some episodes where it's just them flying over open ocean, and Sokka's like, I'm so bored. We've been flying for hours. But that notion of like, wow, they're on an adventure. They have no idea where they're gonna land next, and it could be anything. And they're just going from place to place to place and picking up these experiences along the way. That sense of distance and experiencing new places, that's what got me into world building, and that's what caused me to start making or like thinking of my own worlds. And I would design them specifically with lots of space in between things. And so like the world that has the Everwoods in it is literally that world. There's a line that starts from Avatar and draws its way through a whole bunch of different variations of that world and ultimately ends up at an actually usable its own world. But like it has transformed, it has been reworked, it has been renamed and reconfigured a few times, but it's still the same world in my head. And all of it was made originally just because I wanted to have a sense of travel. I wanted to have a sense of distance and adventure, and each location has a unique thing. Like you said with your world, where you've got the one town where it's like, if there's magic shit, it's here, you know?
Yeah.
Whenever I'm designing worlds, and there's a world I'm working on that will soon be revealed in the future for a future project, but it's the epitome of this, every place that you visit is unique and has its own sort of draw, or you could give it its own tagline. The place where magic is, or like the forest that you can't leave, or the endless ocean that seems to go on forever. Stuff like that, where it's like each thing has a tagline that can explain it, but also gives it a bit of a hook. And I kind of exhausted I exhausted the things that I could fit into that world. And so I ultimately put it aside and changed my foundation to something else. Kind of dropped the notion of let's care about having a continent, dropped the notion of let's care about having a world that makes sense. I spent a long time caring about making worlds that make sense. And it's a lot more fun when you don't have to make sense. It's a lot more fun when you're not agonizing over whether or not your rivers should be converging or diverging. The answer is they should be converging, but who cares? But yeah, Avatar, Zelda, honestly, Destiny 2 has some really amazing world building. I just read their wiki. I mean, I play the game too, but I will just sit there and read the wiki. And then Diablo, the Diablo franchise, big inspo for me. The downtroddenness. I learned a bunch of fantasy words from that game. There's some words in my vocabulary that I only have because of that game. Ethereal, for example, or matriarch and patriarch, I only know because of that game. Yeah, I'm glad that I learned about the word patriarch from a video game before I learned about the patriarchy.
Probably the nicest way you could have been introduced to that concept.
Much nicer way to be introduced. Because in Diablo 2, for those who are not familiar, you play through the game 3 times, basically. There's like normal difficulty, then you beat the game, you do hard, then you beat the game, you do very hard. And every time that you beat the game, you get a title. And after beating the last difficulty, you get the title of matriarch or patriarch, depending on your character's gender. We're going to switch over to Tavern Vibes. Hey.
Yeah.
And so, all of that to say, yes, I have a lot of things that I pull inspiration from. And I've listed the very, very tame ones here, because I can start dipping into musical theater that gives me inspiration. I could dip into the movies and music and whatnot. But if we're sticking to like fantasy world shit, that's that.
We like, not to like fully continue this line of thought, because we could, like you said, talk about this forever. But like the one little nugget of world building that I don't think we've like really talked about at all is like if you're doing like a sci-fi setting, because sci-fi is a little different than like normal world building, with just like even in fantasy versus like modern day world building. Like I feel like sci-fi is its own kind of beast, because you have this notion of planetary systems and stuff like that. When you talked about potentially wanting to make a video series on like how you build worlds off of like inspiration and stuff like that, which you should do, that I would watch the shit out of that. I literally had like a similar kind of thought the other day, where I was like, there are like music mood boards that I have in my brain that have like fully inspired concepts that I really want to pursue. Like a huge one that I think about all the time is like, I don't know if you're familiar with like The Fine Print by the Stupendium. It's an Outer Worlds fan song.
I've been listening to it nonstop because it's very good.
Yeah,
it's stuck in my
head
right now
song.
as we speak.
It's a phenomenal song. I love that song so much. The Outer Worlds is like that.
Find that real quick
game,
and share it.
Hell yeah, please do. If you guys don't know that song, it's a banger. The Stupendium is amazing. But like, it's that notion of like, because it's a fan song for The Outer Worlds. The Outer Worlds is a game that has a similar kind of concept to like Fallout and BioShock a little bit, where it's like we're in the apocalypse. And this apocalypse is corporations own everything. But Outer Worlds is that in space, where you've taken a 10-year-long snooze and you've woken up on a planet where you were promised prosperity for the rest of your life, and that prosperity, you find out, is employment until you die, because you're basically just like guaranteed a job there, but everything is in order to like pay off a debt that you basically unknowingly accumulate. And that concept married to like Where Is the Justice from the Death Note musical, and like all these songs that have been written in media about like there are corrupt people in power. How are we as the little guy going to fight back against that? Like, I really want to do a Stars Without Number campaign in a kind of retro futuristic capitalist dystopia.
Very Firefly kind of vibe.
Yeah, or like the Dimension 20 season, Star Trek Odyssey has a very similar vibe to that as well. You get that like campy retroness that you preserve in like a lot of things that are kind of parodying Tomorrowland. And just doing a campaign in a setting like that, it's like I have all these songs that I've listened to that have just like accumulated into building this world in my brain of like, okay, so these are the people in power, and this is like when you travel to this world, like this world is owned by these people, so this is the type of culture they have on there, and like there's obviously a very easy, like a much easier way to travel between these systems than just planetary travel, because they want you to be able to consume all these different products and stuff like that. But some of them are in competition with another, and it's stuff like that. Yeah. And it's just, I would like, there are so many soundscapes that I could just pick from different genres, and a lot, honestly, like the fan song scope of the internet where people are writing music based off of video games and other media that they like is like a huge seed of inspiration for me personally.
Shout out to Arcane Anthems.
Hell yeah, shout out to Wes. Love Wes.
Wes the best.
It's just like, yeah, you can hear a song sometimes and just be like, okay, so I want to make an entire campaign about this. Blades in the Dark, actually, I've been thinking about as a system a lot, because I really want to do like kind of a Lotus Casino from Percy Jackson inspired heist type thing, where you're trapped in this like indefinitely tall casino, and you have to kind of dungeon crawl through layers of the casino. And there's like, so there's of course like a bunch of really cool gambling, like there's the greedy fan song about Cuphead and making a deal with the devil and stuff like that, or like Casino Royale by Derivacat. There's all these like casino like gambling type things where it's like we're playing with higher stakes than just money here. Yeah. I love that, and I want to world build on that as well. And it's just like so many ideas, so little time, not enough like people to run things with.
I literally just got an idea for a setting that is basically that, like a skyscraper that also is a hell scraper. So it's like a building that goes all the way up, like a single building that essentially lifts into the heavens and also goes all the way down into the hells. And so like at the top, you've got like the very top floor is like God's office, and the very bottom floor is like like a demon's office or something.
I don't know if you listened to the season of the Adventure Zone that they ran Blades in the Dark for, but it was one that Justin McElroy DM'd for. And that man loves a theme park more than anything else. So his Blades in the Dark setting was a planet that is essentially a Disneyland, where each level of the planet is a different theme park.
Yeah.
And the different heists were themed around the theme of that park, which is just so good.
Yeah.
I love that concept, and that is Taz is a great podcast that I wish people talked about more in the big scope of large scale productions that are making an impact on the scene, because they're one of the few that is way more system exploratory than others, and I think it accumulates into some of the most creative storytelling and world building out there, and you can really see how system impacts world building as well.
The Adventure Zone and Friends of the Table are I don't want to say criminally underappreciated, because they're not, but the zeitgeist largely focuses on D20 and Critical Role at this. We've consolidated around those as the big ones, and both of them are kind of trying to branch out. I feel like Critical Role is more trying to make their own thing. D20 has played a bunch of different types of games. That's cool. But Adventure Zone, they really lean in, and it really feels like, when they're picking a system, like you just said, they're picking a system and the world building is happening really in tandem. Or if they're picking a system, they're saying, okay, how can we best leverage this, and not just this will work, or let's just use 5e, who cares? Because not everything needs to be 5e.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's get to some questions. We have a handful of questions submitted from folks, and you can still submit some more questions if you would like. The thing is pinned, but here it is again, just in case. So the first question that we have here is from Cotton, pronouns she and they. Question, and I love this one. This was the first one that was submitted. It was submitted a while ago. I read it, and I was like, I can't wait to answer this question.
Oh, yeah.
It says, we've kind of touched on this a bit, but it says, what was your biggest world building project, and what was your biggest you didn't use?
Oh, didn't use.
So what was your biggest project, and what was the biggest thing that you didn't use?
Okay. Do you have an answer? Because
I have a couple of answers if you're not if you need a second to think about it.
Go ahead first, and I'll think about mine.
So I very very recently was working on a whole campaign that I had to scrap, but that's not the same as a world. I would say in the world that I mentioned that I had the Everwoods in, I wrote a huge campaign that centered around an entirely new area. I was like, I've run out of things I can do with the main continent. I want to make a new area that I can start fleshing out with more new stuff. And I was like, I had put months of work into designing this new place that was radically different from the sort of main continent, which was the main continent was all orderly and established. This new place was a wasteland and outposts, and the strong survive and cull the weak, etc.
Attention.
I did all this stuff. I had a whole huge narrative set up that was ultimately going to result. It was a bit much. It was ultimately going to result in this gigantic interstellar, leaping from plane of reality to plane of reality final boss battle against the ultimate god, which was me as the DM. And so it was a giant, it was very self-flating
so funny
metaphor for I am exhausting myself building all of these realities for you, and you are tearing through them And so the way that you were going to fell the final boss of the god that is the DM creating realities was to exhaust the realities. And so they had to go into all of these different like one-off scenarios and figure out like what to do to like break it and move on and get back out into like the sort of interstellar arena and then back into a newly forged reality. And so I came up with like dozens of these scenarios that were going to be like a huge Mondo session that was going to be like jumping from thing to thing to thing, ultimately making your way ever so closer to an increasingly beleaguered god. We didn't get anywhere near that. We didn't even get to the new continent that I built.
Oh.
Because the group fell apart in like a completely mundane, like somebody moved across the country. We couldn't really get scheduling to work anymore. Someone else got a new job and they couldn't dedicate as much time. And so like I had just started prepping all of this, or not just started prepping, I spent months prepping all of this. And we got to like the port to leave the continent and head to the new place. And then scrap. So, if anybody wants that, free idea. If you ever want to do like the ultimate fourth wall break where you as the DM getting exhausted from having to consistently world build is the final boss, have at. It's yours. I didn't do it, so go do it.
The true BBEG of TTRPGs is scheduling and real life conflict.
Oh, hey, yeah, Cotton picked up on it. It says, wasn't your brother in that one? Yeah, so the reason I ended up doing that was because my brother was playing a cleric, and the god that his cleric was, or the god for his cleric was, the joke was it was me. And he was like intentionally, he had like taken my real world name and added a bunch of like apostrophes and removed a few vowels and used that as the god name.
Love that.
And so I was going to reward that at the end with that god is real after all and is the final boss. But we never quite got there.
It's one of those things where like your ambition can kind of get a little ahead of realistic expectation for a campaign in terms of timeline, because I feel like people do that with their backstories, right, where they're like, I'm gonna feed little bits of my backstory and then at the end it's gonna be this huge payoff. And it's like, hey, if you have a backstory you want to share, I would start sharing it as soon as you can, as soon as is reasonable for your character, maybe, because there's a chance you'll never see that final day you're waiting for.
That, or like just going way overcomplicated with it and you never really have the opportunity to get all the pieces together, and or by the time that you do, nobody knows what anything is anymore. So it's like, I can't believe that Rashenkuus was secretly dizzle dazzle the whole time, and everyone's just like, who are these people? I don't what? What are you talking
like,
about?
What? And it's like, do you remember from like episode 2? It's like,
Wait,
the one that we played 3 years ago. Like.
So how about you? What was your biggest scrap?
So I wouldn't say, because I haven't like had a lot of opportunity to work. I've had the fortunate balance of being player versus DM. I didn't really get stuck in the forever DM slot, and I also like I get to be a player and I get to be a DM like pretty evenly, which is great. So I haven't had the experience where I've had to scrap like an entire idea before, unless it was just something that I decided like, I'm gonna dedicate my attention to something that I'm more interested and invested in. But I mentioned that like the first arc of my campaign with that freaky circus in the Evermore was like the first arc, and there was supposed to be a part 2 where they do leave the continent, and I was like world building out kind of a coastal navigation where they're island hopping in the ocean, and it was going to be very like the Odyssey, where you're exploring all these different islands and you have to collect things from each island to ultimately they were essentially hunting down a lich, who was also someone who had survived since this original cataclysm and had only been rediscovered to still be alive at the end of Arc 1. So the Arc 2 was going to be hunting her down because she appeared as kind of like an apparition and then effed off to her actual sanctum, wherever that was. So the idea was to have them hunt her down and go through this Odyssey style like adventure. I even bought the Ghosts of Saltmarsh module book so that I could just see kind of how a module framed a lot of sea travel, because that can be kind of tricky in a campaign. Really bottle episoding your party for some time. But
doing realistic sea travel.
yeah, it's just like, how many random encounters can you have on the sea? Like, if I'm doing Odyssey Inspired, like, clearly there's quite a few, like, screwed up things that live in the ocean, in Greek mythology. But, I had to, like, I never got to do that arc because I was, trying to graduate college and was just completely exhausting my ability, my like writing, because I was in an English major, so all of my writing was like funneling into academic papers, and I was like, guys, I can't keep running this campaign. I'm so sorry. At least we like experienced the full arc of one story. It just wasn't the whole overarching thing. It was upsetting though, because we had set up a bunch of things for the players on a basis where they'd encounter things on these different islands. Like, our druid had just multi-classed into warlock unbeknownst to the druid, because they were hunting for their dormant god that had abandoned their village, and another god saw that vulnerability and took advantage of it and made like a pact with the druid. And the druid was fully under the impression that this was the god that they were looking for. So we had like set up stuff for that. We had the wizard who was multi-classing into sorcerer, and it just like, I had to scrap the whole thing. Well, not scrap it, but definitely shelve it for an indefinite amount of time, because who knows if I'll ever get to attempt to run that. I would love to, because now I'm older and wiser and I could run it more efficiently as well, and kind of fix some of my world building that was very scrapped together with my first attempt at doing a whole homebrew thing. But that was probably the biggest thing that I had to like shelve, was this Odyssey style seafaring campaign with all these islands that they were going to encounter that had their own individual messed up things happening on each one.
I know this wasn't the question at all, but pulling off really great nautical bullshit in a tabletop RPG is so much fun. Like, having a really good, intense naval battle where, you know, especially if it's the classic, like, just two ships fighting each other, and there's got to be a storm. It has to be storming. If it's not storming, what's the point? Whirlpool optional, but swinging on the ropes to the other side, like having one of your player characters at the helm, like shouting and trying to like control during the storm, and oh, so good. I love it so much. I will, if there's a campaign that I am running, I will include a naval battle at some point. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It could be a purely political campaign taking place in a fantasy town made up in North Carolina. I'm going to put a fucking naval battle in there.
There's a pirate ship there, okay? I also love the I noticed them doing this in Dimension 20 a lot, where they give, I don't know how many systems have this as a part of the mechanics, but I love this notion of the ship having like, you have a move that is ship oriented, and then you have your action that is character oriented. So everyone has like a station on the ship that they're kind of manning, and that's not necessarily like you're pulling on the ropes or what have you. Sometimes it's like loading the cannons, or sometimes it's like you are using the ropes to swing like to and from this other vessel. Like, maybe you're boarding it, or maybe you're helping other people board it in some capacity, but like, you have a move that you take that's ship oriented, and then you have your actual action where you can like cast a spell or hit something, do whatever you'd like. I like the like separation of those mechanics, so that you have like a functional reason for the ship to be involved. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like, you could just be having this battle on land and it wouldn't really make a difference. But if you have a responsibility on the ship that is causing you to not capsize at the same time, or you're ramming it into the side of the other one, like, those are all gonna things that are gonna have repercussions. Like, having to make saving throws so you don't fall overboard is fantastic. I love that.
My favorite real quick anecdote from one of my favorite naval battles that I run. The battle itself, unimportant. What matters is that the barbarian of that group, he was a unique barbarian in that he didn't care for weaponry. He was like, only the weak use weapons. Why would you use a weapon? That's stupid. I kill things with my hands as you're supposed to do, you know? As God intended. And then he gets into the naval battle and he discovers cannons and like fell in love with the concept of cannons and gained proficiency in using cannons and then decided to take one from the ship and fasten a sling, and he would just walk around with a cannon strapped to his back. And he was like, this is the only weapon that I will use. And so for the rest of the campaign, he just carried a cannon around, and every once in a while in battle, would just take a cannon, pull it up over his shoulder, load it, and then light it, and just boom.
That's sick, and I love that. I love that concept.
It was just like, all weapons are bad except cannon. Cannon can stay.
That's really, really good.
Thank you, Cotton, so much for the question. The next question we've got here is from Nick, he, him. Says, what is your advice for filling in your homebrew settings? Additional context says, I feel like I've created a great idea for a world and a premise for my players, but I struggle to get the minute details down, i.e. who exists in a town, what makes them a character. I feel like I'm great at making a skeleton, but I'm missing the meat.
This is interesting. Oh, an interesting question, just going off of what you did in your last world building stream as well, like last Wednesday, because that's like what that was, big hole. Like we can, and I think that's something that can kind of come into play in this answer, right? That I talked about, where it was like, establish like a focal point of either the world or the town that you're focusing on, and then build outward from that. Because I think a very quick kind of like cheat code to get to a lot of like meat in a skeleton is finding the heart of the skeleton and then creating the vascular system and just like building off of that and being like when we for everyone who last week who was here for Big Hole, Dev introduced the concept of a city that just had a big hole in the center of it, and it didn't even have a name. And I kept saying, like, I really hope this whole time we build this high fantasy like society, and they just refer to this thing as Big Hole the whole time. But like, I was saying to Dev, because he asked for a little bit of my feedback on like what it was like as a person watching that stream, and I was like, it was really great that you introduced Big Hole, because it was a hook that not only like kept people engaged and talking, but like it was like, okay, how does a big hole function? Like, what, you can't just have a big hole and everyone's gonna ignore it. Like, there are people who are going to interact with the big hole. In what capacity do they do that? How does the big hole function? What are the different belief systems that surround the big hole? What happens if you touch the big hole? Like, it was, I heard that coming out of my mouth and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna commit. But in subsequent to that, literally created an entire belief sect, like basically a religion surrounding it. Created an entire race of people who had fallen into the chasm and survived and were now ember touched. You had a custom, a tradition that would occur yearly in this society to like present a sacrifice to it. There was just you just put something focal, a focus in your world, and then build outward, and then just ask questions about it and answer it. And then, so if you have a religion that are entirely focused on appeasing this chasm in the center of town, what is the response to that? Are there people who are anti-big hole?
God,
like,
I am so tired of the anti-big hole lobbying firms. Like, it's 2024. Can we stop being anti-big hole?
I know. Get with the hole.
2024, get in the hole.
Get in the hole.
Cotton says fill the big hole with concrete. I very much disagree. I very much think that we need to widen the big hole. Anti-hole.
I think it would be ideal if the entire town was eventually consumed by the whole.
I mean, that is salvation.
Yeah,
If anything.
I think you could literally be like, there are conspiracy theorists who think that's gonna be true one time. Like, literally,
Big hole
it
conspiracy
is,
theorists.
The big hole conspiracy. The big hole. I see the corkboard, I see the red string, and I see the big hole in the center of it.
I love. Okay, we've been saying big hole a lot, and we've also now veered into like the politics of the big hole.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking of like big hole in the sense of like big pharma.
Yeah.
Like, yo, you're being paid by big hole.
No. Big hole is brainwashing the masses.
Big hole, God. All right, let's move away from big hole.
We're joking about it, but this is like, see how easy it is to just like build off of such a simplistic idea as there is a big hole in the center of the city. Like it's just a fundamental detail that has an impact. Make sure it's like significant enough that it would be noteworthy, and then just build outward. I think is a very easy way to kind of streamline your development of a world, is creating things that are kind of like a chain reaction of reactions to something.
I think that makes that encompasses pretty much exactly what I was going to say, which is I flesh things out by just spending time musing there. That sounded so tortured poet, but I will go to a place in my world, in my obsidian vault, or it could be in your doc, wherever you're keeping your notes, just like a place that you want to flesh out a bit more. Maybe you want that flesh to be fleshed out in a big hole.
We're bringing the flesh back to the big hole.
Bringing the fleshy hole back, and so I will go to that space, and I will just start reading what I've got and identify like nouns, like really just like look for nouns and ask like, does this noun have enough stuff around it? So if this noun is a tavern, does this tavern have a vibe, the people who would normally frequent it? Is the proprietor involved in any other places around town, or like is this just like the only thing that they do is run this tavern? Or what's the story behind it? Is it new? Is it old? Does it tend to service passersby or the local people who are working at the fishing dock, stuff like that? Much more zoomed out, rather than like looking at individual buildings in a city street. You can say like, okay, here is my map, here are the towns. Do I have like what is covered, what is not? Within these towns, they need to get their supplies somehow. Where does that come from? Okay, there's probably a farm over here in this general area. All right, well, what livestock do they have, if any? Or maybe they only grow crops. Does that imply this town has an exclusively vegetarian diet? What does that mean for the people there? And so like you can just keep following these threads, and it honestly gets overwhelming once you kind of unlock that I don't want to call it like a skill, but I guess it is a skill. Once you flex the muscle of like looking at something, deriving questions from it, and then following those threads themselves, and then loop that forever, you're going to have more than you can possibly fill out, and it's going to get overwhelming. And so honest to God, like the second step towards how do you fill out your world is stop it. Like, learn when to knock it off, because you will rabbit hole into things that do not matter. And as fun as it might be to do that, and if you're having fun, don't stop. Don't stop doing things because you shouldn't. If you're having a good time, that's fine. But if you're trying to be effective and you're just trying to like get a scenario ready to be used, you need to know where you need to stop. And you need to know where you got to say like, okay, here's going to be like, think of your world as like having a heat map of activity over it, of like player activity. Where are the like bright red spots going to be where a lot of stuff happens? Focus your effort there. You probably don't need to answer like what shaped rock is on the side of the road 3 miles out from here,
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, is like the heat map. I love that visual, because you're absolutely right. Having a cap on something is incredibly important, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. Like, you don't want to have 8,000 tabs of reminders about specific details in your world that are integral to remember, because you're going to overwhelm yourself and you're going to stress yourself out to an unnecessary degree, and it's just not. It's not that important in the end. Having a world that you're proud of and that you feel is alive is good, but there are definitely limitations that you can put on yourself of being like, okay, once I get to this point in development, I feel confident enough to. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's an improv game. You are going to end up like you could spend years fleshing out the most intricate world lore you could ever imagine. Your players are going to go in there and then walk into a shop that you've never even thought about once in your life, and you're going to have to invent a shopkeeper, and you're going to have to give him an inventory, and it's all going to happen on the fly. So like,
and they're going to ask you what their name is, and you're going to be like,
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like you're setting. Go ahead.
I've said it before. I'll say it again. If you're not writing a source book, don't write a source book. It's okay to. I'm going to use Obsidian as an example because that's what I do my world building in. But it's okay to like open up a document for a given place, put in a few bullet points, and close it. It's okay to have just a couple of bullet points of like, here's the vibe. Here's maybe an interesting thing that's here. There's probably, I don't know, a family living here or not. And as Emmy said, like if you write all this stuff, you're going to be still improvising a ton, and you want in the moment the most accessible version of your world possible. Because if you need to look something up, the worst thing that could happen is someone asks you a very simple question like, what color are the drapes in this keep? And you're like, hold on. And then you're like searching all of your notes and scrolling through paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs to like get to a single sentence somewhere multiple pages down that says like, oh, the drapes are purple. And you're like, the drapes are purple. And it's just like unnecessary as opposed to like, okay, the town itself has this sigil and these color themes. And so like, that's all you need. If that town has purple themes to it, it's purple drapes in the keep, and that's fine. You don't need to write an entire specific description of the interior of every single building, for example. Hell, for major NPCs, I will still, maybe not the most major, but for like pretty significant NPCs, I will just have bullet points of like, what do they sound like? What do they look like? What are they hiding? What do they know? What do they want? And like, that's more or less all I'll do. And that way I can glance at it and on the fly interpret, like, here are the constraints or descriptors. How does that apply to the current situation? Because there's no way that I'm going to pre-write how they will react to every possible thing, but I can pre-write what their goals are, and then on the fly interpret what they should be doing in a given situation. And it's not going to be perfect every time, and that's okay. So yeah. You're not writing a novel here. People aren't going to go back and be like, there was a plot hole because he said that the drapes were purple and now they're in this room again and the drapes are blue. So have they changed dimensions? It's like, no one's going to be doing that. Unless you do that, because that's a really interesting concept that like subtle differences indicate that you're in some kind of mirror dimension. But anyway. Oh God, we could absolutely get into that. All right, let's move on to the next question. Thank you so much, Nick. This next one comes from Trips. They, them pronouns. How detailed do you think the world's background should be to help a story move? Additional context says, like small population or large? Does one need to know all the big background characters, like an elite in a city or supervisors to the campground counselors? That's really good. I actually think that this, before we answer that really quick, there's a pitfall that this alludes to, which is writing a novel and then asking your players to be a part of it. Because when you're approaching world building and you're starting to design a bunch of NPCs that if you don't know these NPCs, the story doesn't make any sense. You're writing a novel with main characters that are not the players. You're writing a story about the characters that you want to write about, and the players are just there.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of this. I think most DMs are probably guilty of that. It's not fun for the players because they don't want to have to learn an entire cast of your characters specifically. They want to show their character and let their character shine, and like rightfully so.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean don't have NPCs. That doesn't mean don't have notable NPCs. It just means don't make knowing everything about them a requirement to engage with the story.
Yeah. It's interesting because I play Monster of the Week a lot. Monster of the Week encourages collaborative world building.
Mm-hmm.
So before I started the campaign with my current players, we talked about their character, and then I asked them to come up with a key location that this character would frequent in the town. So, like, places that did not exist when I was planning the world became a part of the town because it exists for my player characters to hang out at or frequent or avoid, even like these areas that I think it's such an interesting concept because a lot of these questions can be very like high fantasy oriented, and obviously that is a huge part of the TTRPG world building sphere. A lot of stuff is going to take place in kind of a high fantasy degree, but when you have something like a small town in North Carolina, you can do this in high fantasy as well, where it's like, where are you from? Tell me about the town that you came from, and it will exist in my world. And then you're working collaboratively to world build, and it also makes your players feel more tied to your world because they feel like they contributed a thread of culture there and people there. And then you can also be like fun and reference things from the place that they've created now, and it's so like one of my players in my Monster of the Week campaign created a bar in town because their character's roommate is in a band and the band plays at that bar.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, so it's like I love coming up with locations like that. I love collaborating with players on world building, and it also like takes a little bit of the load off your own shoulders, right? Is like you're sharing you're killing so many birds with one stone.
We're just taking out all the birds. If you are a bird, you better watch your fucking back, because we are taking you out.
Exactly. And it's a really great way to kind of take some of that responsibility off your shoulders, and then you can Easter egg things that reference to stuff that your players have created alongside you. And I think this question was asking like, how much do you need to know?
Yeah,
and
so Trips actually clarified, saying, I meant the DM knowing this info in regards of building the bullet point ideas for an NPC. So I think it's like how much of a fleshing out of these characters is required to actually move forward.
Oh, so my world building document is, I have like the town, and then I have a sub. I use OneNote. Obsidian has intimidated me a bit with the learning curve. So I use OneNote, and it allows you to create pages and then sub pages of that page. And so I have like a page that's like the town, and then my sub pages are all of the individual locations in that town. And then I have 2 sentences that describe that location. And then I have key NPCs that can be found at that location at most points in time. And each NPC has 3 bullet points describing their main 3 personality traits, and then what voice I use for them. And that's all I flesh out in advance. Everything else is reactionary to how they are interacted with from like via the party, essentially. And the only other things that I've thought out about is if that NPC has relatives that live elsewhere in the town.
I couldn't agree more. Like, you don't need to have them super fully fleshed out. And in fact, like, I found that most of the I discover the characters similar to playing a player character. As the DM, when you're playing all the non-player characters, you're going to discover things about them too. And so trying to pre-plan these characters in full it's a fool's errand, and you're gonna play them, and in the moment you either need to make tweaks because the players are doing a thing that you didn't expect, and now you have to do a bit of a tweak to this character, or you might realize that like what you had planned doesn't actually feel great, or like doesn't make as much sense in the story, or you just learn the dynamics of your players, and let's say it's a character like an NPC that you really need your player characters to respect and like see as an authority figure. And depending on the type of party you have, if you don't know how they're going to react to certain characters, you might need to tweak. I have had plenty of characters that I intended to be plot important and significant and important, and my players were like, I hate this guy. I hate this guy. And I'm like, but I was just trying to make someone good. And it just comes down to fitting to the current moment. And so keeping that flexibility there is very important. You don't need to like have every single NPC be an amorphous whatever. Wow, the music that's playing right now is very inspirational while I'm giving this speech, and it makes it feel like what I'm saying is super important. And so never give up on your dreams. Always reach for the stars. But don't touch them because you'll burn yourself.
Crazy.
You definitely don't need to have all that much fleshed out, and remaining adaptive is very, very helpful.
It's super important.
I'm changing the music because we hit the end of our playlist. Okay, we're going on to ambient music. That's hype.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trips, for your question. Thank you so very, very much. Next up from, is it Philo or Philo? 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 Hello, Philo. Him says, how much do you collaborate with your players when building the world they're playing in? And I love this because you were just talking about Monster of the Week and doing collaborative storytelling. And I was going to say that Blades does the same thing. As a part of your character creation in Blades, you have a friend and an enemy. You have like a friend and a foe. And so like that system actually requests of the players, hey, bring more than just you. Bring some of your history into this world. And I mean, I love that because it's so much easier to ask the players, like, who are you and how can I break you? How can I help you best and how can I hurt you best? Exactly. By way of your friend or your foe. And so if you're bringing these characters, it helps a ton. Maybe you tell me who your confidant is. Maybe they are a frenemy kind of a thing. There's a lot of possibility there. All of it tends to be good. A great example would be I had a player in a Blades campaign who was playing like an alchemist sort of character, like a potion maker, and she had a whole, like, her location that she brought to the world was her potion shop. She would collect. It was more like an alchemical kind of thing, but she would collect a whole bunch of ingredients, and like that was part of what her character wanted to do. Was if some kind of rare ingredient was in reach, she would like go to dangerous lengths to try to get like a sample and bring it back to her shop. So she had a location, she had a place that she brought, which it was used as a staging grounds a couple times. It was used as a hiding place a couple times.
Yeah.
But then the person she brought, who was her confidant, was her, I think it was like her sister, who co-ran the shop, but was also like very straight and narrow. So here's a character that she brought that comes with baggage of, this is my friend, but although I'm doing crimes, she can never find out.
Mm-hmm.
And now here I am being like, oh great,
that.
now I have like that's a type of threat. That's like a social threat that is using your friend to do things that normally you would torment somebody with an enemy, like causing additional stress to maintain a friendship. Like that's cool.
That's great. I love that. It also like shows you how NPCs can be a part of the world building. Like we focus a lot on locations and stuff when we're thinking about world building, but NPCs and creating notable NPCs is also a huge part of it. And that's another thing that you can always do with your players is like I talked about our jock who has a team. So we built the team together. So we also have like uh, we have members of kind of a retired team. Like, they were trained together, and so they're friends, but they don't operate as a part of the same team anymore, because the jock is currently operating as basically a teacher to a next generation of team. And so we created like a set of people who are connected all to this one character that exists in this world, and they all have different kind of connections and driving motivations. And like you said, you can use those relationships to like help or harm. And like there are move sets in Monster of the Week that come from your class that allow you to like call up on your team and be like, hey, I need this info. And based on who they're contacting, like if my jock calls up his band of high schoolers, they're technically in the government program, so they have a little bit of an in the know, but he's gonna get a level of info that is equivalent to high school gossip, and that's how it's going to be delivered to them. Like, like I love world building in that capacity as well, where you're using character relationships as well to kind of develop the way that certain things operate on the world, like communication or information distribution, and like there was a thought I had when you were talking about blades that now Kids on Bikes has a very similar setup system as well, where there's like a session 0 type thing where it's like, okay, character that you know before the game, here's 20 questions, roll a die, answer that question pertaining to this character that you know, and this is a list of positive questions about it. They also have a list of negative questions, and they're not always necessarily you have a negative relationship with this person that you know, but it could be stuff like, what's the worst thing you've seen this person do? And you also have a chart for characters that you didn't know prior to the game, where you answer a question that helps you establish like a pre-existing relationship, all before you even started role-playing in the game. And I think that establishing those character dynamics and relationships lean into the world building as well, because it's like, oh, well, if you've encountered each other before, where did you encounter each other and what was the context of it? And I just think there are so many good systems that build a kind of world building aspect. There's a world aspect to it as well in Kids on Bikes that's directly pertaining to world building. And there are so many systems that have like really cool concepts like that built into the system, and you can just yoink that and use that for whatever. I'm using the Kids on Bikes relationship building thread for my I'm using 5e for the Grimdark Witcher thing, just because it's easier to build the character type that plays into that setting more. But it'll still be pretty roleplay driven as opposed to mechanics driven. That introductory, I'm going to be using that Kids on Bikes introductory system to be like, you guys have been traveling together as monster hunters, as a troop of monster hunters for a chunk of time now. What have your relationships developed into prior to us entering the start of this like scene of this one shot? And I think that's really a great way to collaborate with your players, is to not only collaborate on specific locations, but collaborate on their relationships to people in the location and building out from there as well, because then you have a way to establish like, oh, you guys regularly meet up at this cafe in town because you told me that you see this friend on a semi-regular basis, and there needs to be a place for you to do that at.
Yeah.
Or like, you work this type of job, so now I need to create an institution that allows you to work that type of job. Like, you volunteer at the library, okay, there's a library now, and now I have to fill it with some people that you work with.
Well, damn, now I have to make a library.
Yeah, it's like, I love that. And then that also gives you some like fun ways to be like, oh, well, I built a library because you said you volunteered at the library and there's people that work there. How do I use that as a resource for information distribution now? Because a library would function as that. It's a huge hub of information, similar to the way the high school is a hub of information, But is it as reliable as reading a book from the library? Maybe not.
I think the answer to the question of like how much working with players is good is as much as you can. I am a huge fan of collaborative storytelling and collaborative fiction, and I think that everything is made better when you're able to bounce ideas off of other people, because it's really easy to just accept something and kind of like call that good and then move forward, and then everything from there is not as good as it could have been, right? Like if you were challenged, if you had to like rethink something, or if you were given a new constraint that you had to adapt your world to, all that's going to do is battle test your world and harden it and make it more interesting. If your world can't accommodate a simple request from a player, then like that's a problem, right? So it's a really great way to test the strength of whatever you're working with, and it's also really empowering for the players. It makes the players really happy because they get to bring more of themselves and their character into the world, and they're just gonna be that much more excited to engage with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you for your question. Collaborate as best you can whenever possible, because people are fun and creative and interesting and will make your day brighter. And that's what we believe here. This next question comes from Crimson. Pronouns he, him, says, what do you look for when crafting a rival for your players? So essentially, I'm assuming this is asking like how do you go about planning a BBEG, if I'm understanding this correctly, or like what are you trying to pull in when you're crafting the perfect big bad? Hey, someone gifted subscriptions. Thank you.
The simplest form of that answer is like emotional ties, right? I think to have impact as a rival or a villain, there has to be more to it than just I'm stronger than you, so I'm gonna like. You don't want to just create like a schoolyard bully, right? You want to have something that doesn't just hurt them physically because their opponent is stronger than them, but pulls on their character's heartstrings in a way that's not in a romantic way, unless you want it to be that way. But like heartstrings just in general as garnering an emotional reaction to something. And you want it to not be. I think the best written villain is one that's not straightforward. One that's not you have that gray area of maybe they think they're doing the right thing and that's why they're doing what they do, or maybe there's someone that your character wronged in the past and they have different viewpoints on the wronging, right? Like there's so many ways that you can craft a rival that is not just a sheer force of power, but are also even if it's not to like a personal character, even if it's just kind of a general, it could be a horrible dictator that took over a land that you guys have been sent into combat, and then you get there and you find out that he has like a young child that he's trying to provide for, and the child hasn't participated in any of the horrible things that he's done and is kind of ignorant to it or whatever. That's like when you find out that the dragon has like a baby and you're like, oh, do I still want to slay the dragon? It has a baby. Right like, but it's burnt down so many villages. Like, I think that even though there's not a personal attachment there to that dragon, but there's that emotional conflict of like, oh, is it still the right thing to just kill this dragon? We're going to leave a young dragon who hasn't done anything wrong yet parentless. And in Dungeons and Dragons, dragons are sentient. Like they have their own feelings and intelligence. Mm-hmm. So you're really like taking an intelligent creature and killing its parent. So I love creating a villain that creates a dilemma in why you're facing it, or is not straightforward. There's also the way where it's like it's not straightforward because you haven't quite figured out how it works in its entirety, and you have to like solve a series of like answer me these riddles 3 to like actually get to the heart of of, oh, okay, so this is how it's functioning. Now we can go in, because if we go in sooner than that, it's like it's a kamikaze mission, like where it's gonna go wrong because we don't have all the information we need. And of course, there should always be ways to navigate that if they miss a piece of information, there are other ways of finding those answers. But I think villains should be complex, not overly complex, but complex enough that it makes your players think about why they're the villain.
Yeah. I will say, so Crimson clarified, saying not necessarily BBEG, but like also a rival, like a sort of like rival that forces the characters to have more complexity to themselves. Similar to like using a friend to do whatever. I still want to answer the BBEG question though, because I also have a take on that, which is I agree with everything you just said, that, you know, fun, complex villains that are make you think, make you go and make you maybe even like question attacking them. I also like multi-tiered big bads. So like a big bad who is the big bad for the vast majority, but you learn that there is actually a bigger bad, and that bigger bad is maybe that's the unhinged one, or the other way around. Like like I like to have a big bad somewhere who is just completely fucking unhinged, and I don't want that to be the only or main villain, but I want them to be involved. Either they are the underling, or they are the one in charge, and the underling is the more reasonable one that the players interface with the vast majority of the time. Because either direction that goes is terrifying. Because if you're working with the understanding that the evil person is like put together and like makes sense most of the time, and has pretty decent reasoning, or just like talks to you like a normal person, and then you finally defeat them and you find out that they were the rational one. Now you're stuck with the complete fireball. Like, you are stuck with the unpredictable, just madman.
You've broken the leash.
Yeah, you made a mistake. Because the person you were interfacing with the regional manager, now you're dealing with the general manager, and they're not good. And the reverse of that is you've been working with this like busted ass person this whole time, who's just unhinged and will just destroy things on a whim, and is completely unpredictable. And you finally take them out, and you're like, thank God. And then you meet the actual big bad, and they are very reserved and very in control, and you're like, wait a minute, I kind of missed the chaos. The chaos was at least easy to find. Like, the chaos was at least visible, and now I'm terrified. Like, now I have to try. It's not just a matter of containing madness. So I really like having both where possible, and you kind of need to figure out which one is the right one to present first.
That situation gives very much like target the spellcaster before taking out the melee like fighters in the first wave, where it's like the intelligence like caster in the back is your main issue. These guys are just fodder. Like, yeah,
I will point out again, I'm cribbing from Zelda, which does that quite a bit, of having a sort of like pseudo big bad, and then the ultimate big bad's actually Ganon the whole time. Anyway.
Yeah. I think if we brought it back, like if we answered the concept of like a rival, like a Shonen Jump rival, which is what was clarified, I think that you just kind of scaled down our answer, where you, instead of it being immensely consequential to the narrative as a whole, their dynamic is more consequential to the one-on-one kind of character interfacing that they do, and develop the rival in a way that encourages growth in the character that they're interfacing with the most. So if a character is so I have to like pull from examples because that's the easiest way for me to explain things. I introduced a character who is like has a Californian surfer bro accent, definitely kind of come into work a bit intoxicated more than he should.
Sure.
And works in tandem with this jock. And when I introduced him, I was like, oh, they're gonna have like a buddy dynamic, and it quickly became. I quickly realized, based on my player's reaction to this character, that no, this character that's been like practically raised by the government to behave a certain way and has been like expecting to become essentially a teacher for most of their life, they're not going to be chill with a guy who shows up to a babysitting style job like, hi, and you're responsible, like lackadaisical, and he's the swim coach. People could drown, like. So you have that very laid back character who is maybe a bit too laid back, and it pisses off this other character who is very by the book. And so I use that kind of rivalry that they've introduced now to push this character into loosening that loyalty to the structure that they've grown up with, and learning when it's okay to break rules and make exceptions and stuff like that, and maybe not assume malice from people who don't do it the same way you do it. That's so I use that rivalry to then take these kind of rigid character traits that a character goes into a relationship with and start kind of picking at them and prying at them by just like poking the bear a little bit and putting them in situations that encourage the PC to reflect on why they make the decisions they make, and if there are like kind of open their eyes to there are other ways of going about this, and you have to maybe think about why you think that there isn't, and changing that opinion as you go. It's great.
Sort of like forcing you out of your comfort zone, like sort of
exactly
a driving force that makes it so that everything that you thought you had a handle on everything, but now there's this like wild card factor causing problems for that. And I love that. I think that when I'm working on, or if I'm like helping to design a rival, because usually I just ask the players and they bring them and they do a better job than I could. But often if I'm like trying to put together a rival, I will want it to be not just like anger. I don't always love just doing I hate you and want to kill you as a rival, but I'm going to channel Diana apparently and make a John Wick reference and say that there's a character in, I think it was 4. It doesn't matter. But you know, John Wick is like running around killing a bunch of people, fighting everybody, and they basically like reach out to another dude who's a similarly talented assassin, and they're like, hey, take out John Wick. But that assassin like idolizes John Wick, like sees him as an inspiration. Like, wow, it's like meeting my hero. But also I'm going to kill you because I'm still a professional and this is my job. Like it is my task to kill you. But also, like, while they're fighting, he's literally just like, am I doing a good job? Like, are you impressed with my fighting style? But like, he is a rival. He is a direct threat to the character, but it's not out of animosity, it's out of requirement. And so it could just be like, this character is tragically required to be your rival, but it also could be, I really love what you just said, like just a personality difference and a forced collaboration between two people who just are not going to work well together. Yeah. And that kind of, I mean, if you've worked an office job, if you worked a job, that's actually a pretty common thing, is people who aren't very good at working together being forced to work together. But yeah, it is what it is.
And then you pipeline that into maybe an enemies to lovers plotline, and everything works out beautifully in the end.
If your story doesn't have enemies to lovers, then like, what are you even doing here? Like, at the end of the day, the explicit purpose of playing a TTRPG is to do an enemies to lovers story.
If you don't introduce the rival with that possibility in mind, then you haven't fleshed out the rival.
Then you done goofed real bad. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that you can do with a rival is not have it be actual like animosity, but a I mean, you can kind of take the maybe a more interesting writing on this, but the way that Pokemon does rivals, where it's like in the older games it was like Gary and he was a piece of shit, right? But like the newer Pokemon games, it's like your rival is like, I'm your friend and you constantly drive me to try to be stronger, and so I'm gonna try to keep you on your toes by constantly trying to get stronger, and we're gonna battle. So like it can be a rival that is born of like adoration or working together to accomplish the same goal, but like maybe only one of you can accomplish the goal, becoming the ultimate Pokemon master, right? Or I had a friend who one day we made I think we called it the contract, which was that we were both going to get really, really good at Super Smash Bros. And so we just like both agreed to get good at Smash Bros by just like sparring against each other constantly in that game. We played nonstop for years. And I don't need to get into that right now, but it was like a rivalry kind of, because it was like only one of us could be the one who's currently winning, but it came from a place of we're trying to help each other learn.
The beautiful tragedy that something like that could build up to, if like at one point they're like competing in a friendly close range kind of capacity, like your school kids learning together and like studying the same thing and trying to get better, and then their paths like diverge, and then later in life they come back together in some kind of head-to-head where they're forced to be rivals.
Oh my god.
So
but okay, but you just described okay, you've just activated my trap card. Have you played Fire Emblem Three Houses?
I have not yet. I've observed Fire Emblem Three Houses content, but I haven't played it.
Okay. Well, spoilers for Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is a game that came out like many years ago now. They do that at a grand scale, and it works so well because they've got like the whole premise of the game is it's basically Hogwarts. You've got a school of kids that you're teaching to kill people. They're all very dangerous kids.
That child army.
Yeah, you're basically raising a child army of a bunch of nobles, and there's a time skip halfway through the game where your kids go from being kids learning how to wield swords and cast magic to kids actively at war with each other. Like while you were gone, the three houses, the three different groups of kids are now at war because they all went back home. They all graduated, went home, and now there's wars happening, and now they're all doing a war at each other. And they're not really happy about it, but just like the way that geopolitics works, they kind of have to. And so early in the game, there is a mock battle between the three houses, where you have all the students fight each other, and whatever house you chose, you lead, and the other two teachers lead the other two houses, and you're on a big battlefield near the school, and you're all fighting a three-way battle. Later in the game, that same fight happens again, but it is the three like leaders of these houses here to kill each other. And so everyone who once did a nice, fun, like uplifting, this is like a rite of passage for the students mock battle, and it was sunny and fun and happy, it's now the same fight on the same battlefield, but it's raining and stormy, and everyone is 5 years older, and everyone's fucked up from years of war, and no one wants to be doing this. Like, they have active voice lines for like not wanting to kill each other's friends. Like, these are your former classmates, and now you have like a mandate to kill them. And it's brutal. It's really, really upsetting because you can get into situations where it's like these two characters who were like best friends, and in the young part where they were like, one was a nerd and the other one was like helping him deal with people being mean to him, and now they're on the opposite end of battle, and oh my god, it's so
heartbreaking.
good.
It's so good.
Not to mention, again, with the music, they play a downtrodden version of the same song they play during the original fight. So like they take the like school, like the upbeat, like we're at school, everything is wonderful, such hopeful dreams music, and put it in a minor key, slow it down, and add a lot of sadness. And that's what plays. It's not a happy fight. It's not an exciting moment. Even if it is a climax, it's still heartbreaking. And it's made so much more significant by the fact that it is all that history is there. I've got like goosebumps talking about this shit. I fucking love that shit.
Yeah. Anyway, make rivals for your characters. It's a good thing. It's a fun thing, and definitely won't end in tragedy.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. We've got a handful more questions to go through. Maybe we've got about 40 minutes left in the stream, so let's see if we can get through some more of these.
Got this.
Plu, they them, Plu.
Woo!
They them says, how do you go about tropes or stereotypes? Additional context says, when choosing when, how, and why to make it avant-garde and vice versa. Any examples when you think it's done? When you think it's a good space to introduce it would be wonderful. So, tropes and stereotypes, what role do they have? I would say, for me, first thing is I avoid stereotypes that are like real world stereotypes. I will engage with fantasy stereotypes, you know, the magical high elves or the dwarves breaking rocks or something.
The way that Brennan Lee Mulligan makes fun of high elf society in all of his shit is exactly the way that you can play into a stereotype in a fun and engaging way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like what I actually do with stereotypes and tropes and whatnot is just take them and invert them and mash them up and just throw them back out and see what happens. I don't like making a nice fun, or like, I don't like when my entire world is just tropes and stereotypes. I like when there's enough that you can be grounded. You don't want it to be nothing, but you want a little bit, because people need something to hold on to that makes sense. But I like to take a given thing and ask myself, what is this never associated with, and do that with it. A god of light that is pure evil, right? Like a god of light is almost always exclusively like the goody good boy. Like you got your Lathander, your you know, Morning Lord, kissing babies and stuff. What if like the god of light was literally evil, and the god of like darkness was trying to stop the god of light from like taking over the cosmos in unending blinding light? And the god of darkness was like, nah, we need balance between light and dark so that like life can exist.
Yeah.
There you go. Take a trope, flip it. Now you've got a story.
Exactly. I think that, I mean, some tropes are tropes because they work as a good foundation. Like you can always build off of a trope that is commonplace, because there's a reason it's commonplace, is because it is an easy way to build something different off of it. So like, I mean, what I talked about earlier where I was like, oh, I want to make like a retro futuristic anti-capitalist storyline in space. It's like, yeah, that's been done a million times and it's a trope at this point in that genre. But then you take it and you go, okay, so that's what I want to build off of. How do I make it my own version of that? And it's funny because the campaign that I've been talking about, the Monster of the Week campaign that we're doing for the show that we're producing, is intentionally rooted in trope and stereotype. I literally reskinned the classes to be stereotypical characters that you'd see in a horror movie, so that they have this like dumb baseline to build off of. Because when you watch a horror movie, like you're always screaming at the protagonist, like, why would you, like, I don't know if you've seen that one like insurance ad where the group of kids are like at a haunted house and they're like, let's hide behind the wall of chainsaws. but like it's, you can make a parody of it in one way, like that's one way of going about it, or you can set up the trope and then subvert the expectation at the end. Like you can, like the way I described our prologue episode being recognizably the plot of the Blair Witch Project, and then subverting the expectation for the end. Like that's literally the premise of the entire campaign, is these like monsters are based off of huge slashers that anybody who's a fan of the horror genre, or even maybe not a fan of the horror genre, like most people have heard of Friday the 13th or Halloween and those movies. So being able to like recognize like, oh, this is a pattern of trope that I can identify with this movie. So I see the inspiration being drawn here, and then taking that and being like, yeah, it's that, but not quite. You have to look past that.
Yeah.
And then figure out what is actually going on here. I think that's an interesting way to go about it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think what you said about leaning into tropes, stereotypes, whatever you want to call them. I think archetype is also a word that can be used there. Like stereotype kind of implies negative, but like you're more describing like taking the classic character types that make these stories work. I would say that's closer to archetype, but that's like splitting hairs. But leaning into recognizable formats is what draws in the players. It's what, if you can effortlessly accept things, that's what gets them hooked in and meshing with the world. And then when something breaks, that stands out. And so I saw Plu said something about like, I have the urge to subvert all expectations. And I think I wonder when to sometimes lean into fun stereotypes. And yeah, exactly. I think we want to subvert the expectations because we want to have that oh moment, right? We want to have that moment. Like, hey. But in order for that to be good, like you don't want to be the last season of Game of Thrones in terms of subverting expectations, because they subverted the expectations where we were expecting a good show and they didn't do that. And so like what you want to do is have a relatable baseline and like spikes of messing with things. And it's okay if that reasonable baseline includes a few messing with things and things like flipping on its head. Like, I will sometimes make a world where, like, the basis of the world is like, I'm going to need you to just accept a few things as fact. And if we can get past that, then we're good. But it's not like you don't want, like, every single plot point to be like, and then secretly the, I don't know. Doesn't matter. You don't need to flip everything on its head constantly. Yeah. Because and then you run into a really annoying situation with your players where they're going to preemptively question everything, and you don't really want that, because like that is its own very toxic form of metagaming, where you've given the players a reason to never engage with your world as they normally would, which is not how people do. Right? Like people don't exist in a perpetual state of, I don't trust that this is real, or I don't trust that this is correct. Like you don't walk to your bathroom door and before you grab the handle of the door, you're like, wait, what if this is an illusion? Now, if that is your life, I would love to know you, because you live a much more interesting life than I do. But
everything in my house is actually a mimic.
Oh, yeah, that's problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the players start being, when they're taken out of the world and put into their logical head of, I must question things, rather than being a part of the world and just moving through it, that's when you've reached a problematic level of subverting expectations. You want excitement, not distrust, I guess.
Yeah. I think what Plu said in chat is a good response to that. Like, make players feel smart if they are correct, kind of thing. Like, your players figuring it out is not a bad thing.
Yes.
Sometimes your players are going to figure it out, and if they do, reward them for figuring it out, because it's impressive to have a mystery presented to you or have something questionable presented to you and be like, no, I do think I get what's going on here, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, 100%. It's so rare that players actually have a chance to get a handle on the things that you've got planning in your head. Don't overlook those moments. Don't lose sight of, my players figured something out. Ooh, that's good. Because for every one of those moments, you're gonna have 36 kindergarten grade puzzles that your players are gonna take 4 hours to solve, And like they're gonna come across a puzzle. It's like a lever on a wall next to a door, and they're gonna be like, "What does it mean? How do we open the door? Who? Ah!" And they're gonna like investigation check the lever like 1,000 times and do all sorts of stuff, and all they had to do was pull the lever or open the door.
Yeah, you don't want them unnecessarily overcomplicating some simplistic things and just dragging stuff out, because sometimes a door is just a door.
Sometimes a door is just a door. Now that's advice. That's concise, good, perfect advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question, Blue. Dark Wolf, they them says or asks, what is the most memorable frustration you faced? And did you overcome it?
This is a funny question.
That's a really good question. Do you have something, or should I go?
I think a simple one. It's never like, oh my god, it's so funny because there's like two from that original campaign. The homebrew one where I stuck them in a circus because I trapped them in a hall of mirrors at one point.
Oh, good.
And that was one thing. But there's also one that I know another player in the party was like, I know the answer, but my character wouldn't say this to another person. Like, my character would not have figured this out, but I know it. And the character that's currently investigating it has no idea, and I can't say anything about it to them. So, like, it was a funny, like, joint thing where we were both kind of watching this player try to figure out and being like... So, like, the first one was the one that I'm talking about where the player mutually was frustrated with someone overcomplicating something that didn't need to be overcomplicated. Was I gave them that magic map that would direct them to the circus. The only thing they needed to figure out about the map is that they had to look at it through the goblin glass to see the true guiding marks. I don't know if the player forgot that they had the goblin glass or something like that, even though I'm pretty sure it got brought up semi-shortly before they re-entered the forest to navigate back to the circus. But this player was convinced that they needed to follow a random bird that I described as, like, sitting in a tree above their head as a guide back to the circus. And it was just like, God, please don't follow the bird. The bird doesn't know where it's going. It's just birds live in the woods.
But it's a bird that you called out and therefore must be deeply plot important.
It's like you have a map in your possession and you're not gonna look at the map. You're not even gonna attempt to follow the map without the glass, which would also like result in something that I have plans for. It was just like, oh no, I described a vulture and now they're all talking about the vulture. It's like, but, and then the other one was when they were in the maze of mirrors, there was a timer for this wheel that was in the center, and they navigated to the center and found the wheel. And the wheel was on a timer, and every like 15 minutes, the wheel would spin and a different thing would be spawned in the maze. And they couldn't figure out that you just need to prevent the wheel from spinning to prevent the continuation of being bombarded with rounds and rounds of like combatants or challenges. And so they just kept fighting them off, and I was like, y'all are gonna exhaust your resources before you ever figure out that you simply just have to prevent this wheel from spinning. And the way, and like there was a solution to the puzzle like in the center room that they had located. But it was, yeah, it was, I was just sitting there like,
puzzles always seem like
right?
such a great idea until you're running a puzzle and then you're like, wait, this, oof.
Oh, maybe I overestimated their train of thought here.
I think my biggest frustration, it's a more of a I'm disappointed in myself.
Yeah.
It was a big bad that we had been building to for quite some time. It wasn't a huge campaign, but it was like a few months in the making. And we were finally at the big bad. I had put so much effort into specifically writing a bunch of really intense descriptions of like the layer that he was in, like all the different ways that he could do like really cool manipulative stuff to like the keep that he had, and I had so much planned for the battle. The players roll up, they get into his like sanctum or whatever, and he's given his big bad speech, right? Like, I'm doing the thing that we all live for, which is delivering the big bad guy's evil monologue right before the final battle. And I had spent so much time working on this guy and working on that battle and working on that plot. And he was giving his speech. And one of my players pointed out a very obvious logical inconsistency with the guy's plan, like with the big bad's evil speech, to the point of I didn't think about it and I've already like way overplayed my hand, and this person like just undermined the entirety of this character's motivation, and there's no reason to have this fight. And so we scrapped the fight and we just ended the campaign with like a that's dumb.
Oh, no.
And then the players just like I had the big bad like fall into an existential crisis and played it as like they broke his mind or whatever, and like I'm sure like that's a story that the player is never gonna forget. I defeated the big bad by poking a hole in the plot, but like I was so excited for this big payoff, and it wasn't even about losing the work that I did. Like, I can just take the work I did for that encounter and roll it into a new encounter. Like, if something doesn't work out, if your players ever like force you to have to scrap something, don't delete it, just rework it, right? That's not the problem. The problem was the moment was lost. The problem was I had spent months building up to this encounter, and it just fell flat on its face. And so it's like the frustration is like I could have run that monologue by another person who was not in the encounter, who was not in the campaign, and they would have pointed it out to me. But so I would say that's my frustration. Alrighty.
Got actually to death.
Actually the big bad to death. Alright. We've only got a little bit of time left here, so I'm gonna look through the rest of the questions. Excuse me, Yanni. Trying to find like one more one that we can sink our teeth into here.
Mm. It is such a legendary trait to brag about.
You have a what?
I was responding to a comment about the like Darko said,
oh,
that's such a legendary story to brag about. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's still beating the big bad. Like,
yeah, it counts. It definitely counts.
It definitely counts.
I mean, like, players live for having those moments that like nerds. Okay, the more moments that you can give somebody, a chance to get drunk at a nerd party and tell their friends about this wild thing they did in a D&D session, like. The more moments of like that, the better.
Yeah.
I have a player who I know constantly tells people about the time that it was a campaign that I was running, so there was a naval battle, and he jumps off the ship onto a kraken and uses a bag of devouring. It's the version of the bag of holding that eats whatever's inside of it. Rules as written, that bag consumes whatever's inside of it when it closes. But this move was too good to pass up. He jumps onto a kraken, opens up the bag, and like puts it around a tentacle, the end of a tentacle of a kraken, and then runs up the tentacle, holding the bag behind him, having the bag devour a kraken tentacle as he's running up to the body of the kraken. So he took out an entire arm of the kraken using his bag of devouring by wall running up a kraken. It was the sickest thing ever.
I love that shit.
Yeah, so very good. Let's see. Here's a good one to end on. And thank you to everybody for your questions. If we didn't get to your question this time, it's all in a spreadsheet. I will keep it for the future, and it'll possibly be answered on a future World Building Wednesday. This one again comes from Plu. It says, what was a time that you improv'd something on the fly and it became way more crucial to the world?
Oh God, I'm gonna have to think about that.
And I mean, the answer is constantly.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a nature of being a DM, is like making something up and being like, well, now I gotta make that make sense.
I think I can think of a character. I had to come up with the players were in a like merchant rest stop kind of place. Like it wasn't really a trading post. It wasn't really an outpost. It was just like a field that became a common like resting point for merchants, and they would all just trade with each other while they were there. And I had this one character that I just kind of wanted to have a character doing a thing in the background that like looked interesting. I don't know what was going through my head when I first invoked this character, because the second that you name or like you give a character a description, and especially if they're doing something, especially if they're looking at an object, that is the only thing that the players are going to care about. And so I, for whatever reason, while ad-libbing just what was going on, I ad-libbed a character who is this woman dressed in like a brown suit, looking at a old pocket watch, like a golden pocket watch on a chain. And she was just like looking at it a little bit like confused and like tapping at it and whatnot. And it was supposed to just be like one of several merchants who were like messing with their wares or something. That character became the central figure to the plot. That character became a time traveler who was like pulling all of the strings. And that stopwatch was a stopwatch that allows them to time travel, and they weren't supposed to be there. And so when they were first seen in that scene, that was at a different point in their timeline. And ultimately, like they weren't the big bad, but they were like a facilitating entity that was like the kind of thing where like, you know, you go back and you see that in every scene this character was there and like you weren't looking close enough. It was that kind of thing. So this character that I ad-libbed just being in the background messing with their wares ended up being a time traveling, critically plot important main NPC. Just cause
I love that.
Just cause I accidentally ad-libbed a person a little too much.
You gave a person a hat, and now that's all they care about.
Gave him a hat and a pocket watch, and then this game over.
I love that. I think the only real example I can pull from, because when I was doing my homebrew world, because it was my first attempt at DMing, and I was like, I'm gonna build everything from scratch. A lot of that was kind of flying by the seat of my pants, because I didn't have like the concept of like having the full story fleshed out before beginning the campaign. And by fleshed out, you know, I had like an end goal in mind, right? I didn't really have my full idea of what the end goal was going to be. I just knew it would somewhat involve like having to revisit that initial Cataclysm battle where like this cult would make another appearance, right? But I didn't have anyone in mind for like who would be orchestrating that, really. And I was like, I'll get to that bridge when I get to it, because like it's far off before they even start being introduced to this character. So I kind of I improv'd that the wizard wouldn't die when getting struck by that like ball of magic lightning. I made the decision in that moment that he wouldn't die from it, because I was like, that would suck, because they're just in the woods on their way to like the actual battlefield that they're about to like entreat onto. So like he can't just die because he got random magicked into death. That sucks. So I was like, no, that's not gonna kill him. It's going to temporarily kill him. He's going to have like an out-of-body experience, and then he's going to wake up in his body again, but changed in some capacity. And that is what snowballed into, oh, the key NPC that they've been working for also has been struck by this magic, and that's why he's so like that's why he knows so much, is because he's actually been around since the original Cataclysm. And that resulted in one of my favorite things that happened in that campaign, which is after they destroyed the circus and nearly died, like they almost TPK'd in the final battle against the hags, and a little bit got like cleric ex machina'd out of there. They had pretty much won the fight. It was just a matter of like, okay, they need someone to like really get them out of there now. There was a scene where this token NPC interrogated them in a prison, like a police outpost, and had to kind of pretend like he didn't know who they were or why they were out there, because it was secret that they were working for this organization that he was running. And that instilled a lot of distrust in especially the druid of that party, who was like, we went out here on something that you sent us on, and then you arrested us and pretended like you didn't know us to like keep face with like the royal guard that you're a part of here. Like, that sucks, dude. And it resulted in a confrontation where he revealed that he had been exposed to the same magic that the wizard had been exposed to. And then they played a whole session as his original adventuring party in the past, where they got to basically help kind of write the original story of the champions encountering the cult, where I played this key NPC as a DMPC, and they played the members of his party who were the champions of the council, and then like experienced his backstory through that flashback, but they were playing in it.
Ooh.
And it was such a fun way to not just like info dump a bunch of lore at them about my NPC, but instead engage them directly in the history and help them also, again, kind of like contribute in the world building of like who were these people in the past. And the only other member of his original party was a character that I then created the like lich of, that was working to resurrect this cult. She was the BBEG that had like silently been trying to rebuild the connections that this cult had established on that day, because like it is that tragedy of like they trained together to fight this cause, but the counselor that was championing her was actually kind of like double agenting and was like, we should just convince everyone to side with this cult because they have an immense amount of power, and an immense amount of power wouldn't be a terrible thing for this kingdom. Whereas his counselor was very much like, we must stop this at all costs. So when it came down to it, she was like, please, I want to save the lives of you. You're all my friends. And he was like, how could we ever turn our back on like the people of this kingdom, because it's the safe option. And that's what kind of created the like villain of the story. And that was entirely because my wizard couldn't take a hit from from some random magic that he got struck with in the woods.
It just spirals so much.
It really is. I was like, now I gotta explain why this magic didn't kill him. And that's how it was born.
God, absolutely love it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think that we probably should wrap it up, because we are just a few minutes left here, and I want to make sure to give a chance for you to shout yourself out and whatnot. So I will first say thank you so incredibly much for hanging out with everyone here tonight, and for chatting with me about world building stuff and answering all the questions. This was amazing. This was so much fun.
This was great. I loved being here.
Why don't you take a moment and tell everybody all the stuff that you're doing and who you are and where they can find you and all that good stuff.
All right. So again, I'm Lemon, or M, or Emmy, or Emily, anything like that. You can find me on most platforms going by Lemon. Lemon Emmy is my name here on Twitch, but if you stick a Y there after the N in Lemon and turn it into Lemony Emmy, that's my handle on every other platform. Mostly TikTok is where I'm producing a lot of my TTRPG oriented content. So you get to see my silly little memes, and then my seeds of advice that I gather from time to time. And then if you want to check out if the Monster of the Week plotline that I have described a couple times now is interesting to you at all, if you want to watch a Monster of the Week campaign set in the 80s with a bunch of camp counselors fighting a bunch of slasher movie killers. Our prologue episodes are out. You can find Before We Die on most podcasting platforms. You might also be able to search up Camp Blood Moon, and that will give you the direct link to our show, because there's not another Camp Blood Moon out there. And we have a 2-part prologue out there as kind of a teaser to what we're producing. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, Before We Die is the name of the podcast?
Before We Die.
Okay, the first one that I found is about...
it's the medical one,
yeah,
right?
It's the medical one.
That's why I always say, like, Camp Blood Moon is the direct search term that you can look up. That will get you to our podcast.
Blood Moon. Bogfolk? Wait.
Huh?
Camp Blood Moon.
It's one word.
What Blood Moon? Blood Moon. I'm just trying to get a link to share with the chat.
Yeah, you're good. I have a link if you want it.
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead and share with the chat.
Hell yeah, here you guys go. Because we only have 2 episodes out, we're kind of doing that thing where it's like the search algorithm is not quite in our favor yet, but there you go, guys.
Perfect.
If you want to check out our podcast, it's right there.
Perfect. Thank you. I was trying my damnedest to get you a link.
You're all good. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so very, very much. And to everybody in chat, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the gifted subs. Thank you for supporting each other. Thank you for the questions. They were absolutely lovely. And I am so glad to see that y'all are enjoying this and gave Emmy a very nice warm welcome to the community. So thank you all so much for that as well.
Thank you to Dev, and thank you to Dev's community. You guys are awesome. This was great.
Y'all are amazing. This is what it's all about. Is just we were literally saying earlier today, like, the reason that the both of us like being in this space is just to like do nerd shit with people and like have fun doing nerd shit. And so yeah, we're doing some nerd shit.
It's wonderful.
Alrighty, y'all. It is time to head out. So thank you all so very much. I'm going to be streaming again on Friday afternoon for an afternoon tea time. Be sure to be following. Definitely follow Lemon. Definitely follow all of her stuff, like all of her socials and everything, because she's amazing.
Thank you.
But until then,
follow this.
Take care. Be well. I will see you all in the future.